And hello, I'm John Ehrlichman, and we are just learning, according to the AP, that Donald Trump has won Indiana. We are doing live coverage here of U.S. election 2024. This is my YouTube channel, which I launched about a month ago. And thank you, by the way, for subscribing. It's been great to get your support as we've launched this channel. Tonight's a big night. It's a night that everybody is watching, and we wanted to be live to talk to you, to answer any questions that you might have, and also to put some context around the stock market, which is very closely watching this election right now. Just for some context here, everything that you have heard about this election cycle, how tight this race may ultimately be, we will find out in the next few hours how that plays out. But for investors, they have very closely been watching what this all means as well. It's just around 7 o'clock Eastern time. And as we speak, we're getting some details on some of the state-by-state early victories. Already, we are seeing a number of the U.S. networks report that Donald Trump has taken Kentucky, which would not be a surprise. Obviously, a lot of the coverage tonight is going to be focused around the subject of the swing states, the battleground locations across the United States. And we will hopefully be getting a little taste of that in the next few minutes as well. At least on this YouTube video stream, we're going to be talking a lot more about what the markets are focused on. Now, just taking a look at what's happening in the pre-market right now, it's a very busy, active night for that, as any election night ultimately is. It does appear that right now investors are in a slightly positive mood. And I'm getting a question there. Oh, thanks for joining. Great to have you, by the way. And I appreciate the support you've been giving me on this platform. And nice to have you here. How long after the election should we wait to see what will happen to the market? An amazing question. I mean, it's why we're live tonight, through the power of YouTube. The reality is that all the pundits who are a lot smarter than me in trying to assess the situation right now have said the following, that if you've got one scenario where there's a decisive win for Kamala Harris, that's going to be a pretty clean, digestible story for the markets. Hey, Beth, thanks very much for joining us. Great to have you with us. If there's a decisive win for Donald Trump, that's going to be an easy thing for the markets to digest. Number three, and you've heard that before, it is the toss-up scenario where we just don't know after tonight. A lot of people will have to assess that over the next few days, potentially. And perhaps that would include the stock market as well. But I will tell you, it's been pretty active in the markets. And Brian, thanks very much. Appreciate you joining us, El Capitan, on a very busy night here. And we're just starting to get some of the election results. I think what's going to make this stream a little bit different, whether you're just tuning into this or you're watching on multiple screens, I'm keeping tabs on what's crossing on the market wise right now and on television as well. There's my partner, Caroline Leslie, tuning in as well. And a shout out to Caroline for all the amazing work she's doing as we've launched this new venture. If you don't know, I worked in television for 25 years. And just about a month ago, we started a new venture where we're doing a lot more work right here on YouTube under the Ticker Take banner. And Caroline is a huge part of that story. And it's great to have her joining us here as well. So the question we got earlier, which is a great one, and I'm going to be watching the comments and trying to field your questions as well, because look, these are exciting nights and a lot of people have questions. We would have to think, if there is anything that feels surprising to the market, then you would see the kind of reaction that we saw, let's say, back in 2016. If you remember, given that the polling in that election had been leaning towards a victory for Hillary Clinton, you might recall when all of a sudden we started to see the state-by-state results favoring Donald Trump, there was a bit of a sell-off in the markets, because that's what the markets are. In the short term, they are a voting machine, and people have to recalibrate, if you will. Now, it didn't take long as we moved into the next trading day for stock market investors to see Donald Trump as perhaps a positive for the market. So they can move fast, but definitely they have been active recently, with a lot of people just kind of hedging positions. I'm going to try to read comments too as we go through this, and that's the beauty of this right now. It's why I'm here right now. I got lots of notes. I can share them with you, but we have a question here. About would I invest if it was a blue win, and where if it was a red win? Yes, I love this question. I absolutely love it. And here's why. Pundits have spent weeks slicing and dicing the market to try to say if Donald Trump wins, these are the stocks that might benefit. And if Kamala Harris wins, these are the stocks that are going to benefit. Now, the truth is, it never quite plays out that way. However, there is a lot of thinking on Wall Street. We'll just start getting right through it because I can talk about, hopefully, a lot of stuff here, guys, as we have this conversation. But we'll go through some of the comments that I was putting together on how Wall Street analysts and strategists are thinking about different sectors. Okay, why don't we start with what if Donald Trump has a victory? And again, as I said off the top, if it's a decisive victory, that's going to be something that's a lot easier for the market to digest, and we'll watch how the market digests it. Right now, the U.S. futures are pointing to a positive start in tomorrow's trading. It's going to be a long night. Um, so, in the case of a Donald Trump victory, there is a general view. And again, this is just general stuff, but there were analysts at Evercore ISI, for example, who were suggesting that, well, if you've heard Trump talking about being sort of a favorable politician towards the energy industry, it's no surprise that there's been a lot of commentary from a lot of the analysts that oil and gas is a sector that could benefit. So that's one. Another area that is very commonly coming up these days as a possible area that could benefit is the banking sector. We have a general view that in an era where a lot of financial institutions are feeling pretty tied down by regulation, that a Trump administration would usher in deregulation. How far they might go, nobody ever wants to get into the details of that, do they? They just talk in broad strokes. But in broad strokes, there's a view that the energy sector, the financials would be beneficiaries. Some of the healthcare names potentially too. Whether it's names that would be tied to the Medicare Advantage, like a CVS or United Health. JP Morgan was talking about the possibility of steel stocks benefiting. So that's a little bit of context on the potential Trump winners. And I'm going to cycle back on all this stuff. We can go through them again, but I did want to just give a chance to go through some of the answers here. And thank you, by the way, for being here, guys. Like, this is so cool that you're here. I hope you'll stay. I hope you'll tell other people that we're live here. I'll stay as long as we feel we're having fun. And I get the sense it could be a long night too. So we're ready to hang around. Okay, Trump losers. It gets a little bit squishy here. There are some strategists. Evercore, for example, was suggesting auto stocks might struggle. Which auto stock? I guess it might depend, because last time I checked, Elon Musk was putting a lot of money and support behind Donald Trump, and you would have to assume that a Trump presidency would be favorable to his company, Tesla. But generally, the Wall Street strategists say maybe some of the auto companies might struggle. Agriculture could be a difficult one because of all this tariff talk, and we can talk a little bit more about that as well as we roll through here on election night. As for a possible Kamala Harris victory, there's been a general view that renewable energy names could be beneficiaries, just continuing down the path of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was beneficial to a lot of renewable companies already under the Biden administration. That's seen as something that's likely going to continue if Kamala Harris is victorious. The other sectors that I saw getting some attention, a whole range of them, from home builders. Obviously, Harris had put forward some plans for first-time home buyers. Maybe if there's more support for people of lesser means, the discount retailers could benefit. Maybe a Ross Stores, for example. There's been a big push with all the infrastructure spending by the Biden administration to also be cybersecurity ready. And so there's a general belief that maybe the cybersecurity companies would benefit as well. So that's another area. Harris losers could include some of the drug makers. I mean, if there was some tougher talk on drug prices, so maybe an Eli Lilly, which has had a hot hand, obviously, over the last year, or a Pfizer might fall into that bucket. And we'll keep going through some of these, but those are some of the general sector movers. But I'm always very cautious on saying, this stock is going to be, a clear winner, this one not, because I often go back and I look at actually what happened during these different presidential terms. Bloomberg has this great data on it, and it never quite plays out that way. Here's a good question coming in from Nab. Do you think a Trump win would uh, would also be a win for Musk's Tesla? I mean, without putting any thought into it, I would have to say yes. Elon Musk has put what feels like an unprecedented, at least publicly, level of support and funds behind a presidential nominee. And I would have to assume he wants an ROI, a return on investment from that. Although Musk often just talks about, the his general views on democracy overall within that. But it's going to be complicated because I'll go back to the tariff part for a second. Like, you think about a company like Tesla, which has a lot of ties into China. This is a really complicated field. We just don't know what's going to happen with the tariffs. I mean, I'm joining from Toronto in Canada. There's a lot of talk up here about what a Trump tariff-filled administration would ultimately mean. But this is very much a story that's getting attention with a lot of the big U.S. companies that are dependent on some of those key countries that might be hit by tariffs. I'm thinking like Boeing is a great example. Boeing sells a lot of planes into China as well, so you don't know necessarily what would happen there. The other thing that we'll circle back, you guys can ask me another question about this, but speaking of Musk, if he ends up being the do they have a term for him? If he ends up being the budgetary czar, like if Trump is victorious and Elon Musk takes on this role of chopping cost within the federal government, there's a whole grouping of stocks, blue chip companies that actually benefit tremendously from government related work that could be worth watching as well. Anyway, that's the point while we're live right now. There's just so much to talk about. There are a couple of questions that came in, so I want to get to these for a second. The Piggy Bank Chronicles asking, I'm curious how both parties will react if the longshoremen go on strike, closing down all the eastern ports. It's a great question. I think that what we have seen with a lot of the action on the picket line over the last year is how damaging that can be for the economy. And at the end of the day, one would have to think that there's going to be a constant desire to get things back to work. We're now going to enter into this interesting period where let's assume there was a decisive victory tonight. And I'm just taking a look here because, if you want to get an update on what's happening you have a million places to look for that content. But, we saw a reported Indiana win for Trump already, for example. But if we do have a decisive victory tonight, and so we can have a conversation in the days ahead about who is the next U.S. president, for any of the short-term issues, who ultimately is going to be fielding those? Is it Joe Biden in his final days as president? Is it immediately getting handled by the next president, the president-elect? It's a good question. We'll see what happens on that front. Do you think a Trump win can impact the Europe market? Well, I think that in Europe, and it's a great question actually as well. If we take a look at what's been happening with some of the European stocks this year, I am just curious because I'm paying so much attention to the North American economy. By the way, the stock market in the U.S. was higher again today. I mean, it's been at record levels, and we can also talk in this chat about the general stock market performance. I know we talked about stocks and industries that might benefit from whoever emerges victorious in this presidential race, but we could also just talk about broader stock market performance. Looking at that year-to-date performance for the broader European market, clearly it has lagged the U.S. I would have to think that a lot of players in that market are very closely going to be watching what happens on the tariff front as well. Melissa Marsh fielding or putting in a question. Melissa, thank you for joining us. What are your thoughts on healthcare stocks with a Trump administration? So this is a really helpful one, Melissa, because I think that healthcare is an industry that is, at least in terms of the stock market, divided in a bunch of different buckets. I was saying earlier that there are some companies that are tied to the so-called Medicare Advantage, CVS, United Health, that they could struggle. They could definitely struggle if Trump is victorious. But there are some that would be, watching these sectors very closely. If you had a Harris win, health insurance companies come to mind. They're tied to the Affordable Care Act, Medicaid, and since enrollment in those programs is going to be an issue to watch, is there an expiration at the end of 2025? How is that dealt with? Those are going to be some companies worth watching. Also, if hospitals ultimately have fewer insured patients to treat, is that the kind of thing that would be beneficial to a tenant or an HCA? So there's some good stuff there. There's a question that I missed earlier about investing in brands like Lucid, Rivian, electric vehicles, and all the green shares available on the market. That's a great question too. As we take a look, and it looks like right now, with polls still open until 8 o'clock Eastern time, a lead for Donald Trump in Florida, just based on some of the votes that are coming in. I'm just citing CNN right now, actually, on that, as well as in Virginia. And I would love to talk a little bit more as well about the swing state story and how that might play out tonight. But getting to the question about electric vehicle names and Lucid, let's see what they've been saying in the trading world over those names over the last couple of days. I think that generally speaking, the EV stocks are a group that would likely get some exposure within that renewable bucket that I was talking about earlier. I think that already there was a view that if Kamala Harris has a big night, if Kamala Harris is a decisive winner in this election, that a lot of the green initiatives we've seen under the Inflation Reduction Act that have benefited a lot of renewable players, that story could continue as well. So I'm even just looking at some of the trader talk. Keep an eye on the likes of First Solar, Sunrun, SunPower, Enphase, Plug Power, ETFs like Invesco's solar ETF, but also to be watching the electric vehicle stocks, and that would include Lucid. So that was my roundabout way of getting to Lucid, kind of getting caught up into this sort of group of sector names that might be on the move. Now, I will just make a quick note about the stock market performance, regardless of who wins, because I know we've had a big year for stocks, broadly speaking. It's true in North America. But going back to 1960, I believe there's only two election cycle years, 2000 and 2008, where ultimately it's been a negative year for stocks. So there's a lot of historic trends favoring the broader stock market. I know, again, it's been around record levels, but there's a lot that's still favoring the overall performance. And actually, if you look out a year later after a stock market, um, uh, if you look at stock market performance in an election year, I believe there's only one election since 1984 where the market was lower 12 months later, and that would have been the 2000 period when we had the tech bubble. So there's a lot that would suggest that the markets are still in rally mode. You could even make the argument that the fact that you have interest rate cuts that are now on the table could be as influential as this presidential election, which is amazing to say just because this is an historic election. Brian is back with a question about VOO, and it's I feel like I'm a ticker machine, but sometimes I forget. But that's the S&P 500 Vanguard ETF. Yeah, I think that's a great question that you asked. Just sort of getting back to that broader stock market performance. I would say that you have a good amount of stock market strategy talk, suggesting that we could see the S&P continuing to gain. I guess piecing it together and breaking it down as to, if you want to talk about potential winners or losers, just to use Trump as an example, there were analysts at Evercore. This is a Wall Street firm that tracks the markets, that made the case that if Trump wins, they think that would maintain the momentum in the market, that he'd be a business-friendly leader, despite the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty around the tariffs, and that could get the S&P towards a level such as 6,300. So I'm just trying to remind myself where we closed today, 5780. So, that's a call, I believe, from Evercore for year end of 6,300 for the S&P 500, assuming a Trump victory. Hope that answer helps. I wanted to mention that one of the things that hasn't come up in your questions yet, and Quinn, thanks for the thumbs up. I appreciate that. Thumbs up back to you. Is that you could make an argument that the stock market's preferred scenario would be one of gridlock. So there's been a lot of talk about the presidential election, maybe a little bit less on the fact that you have, battles across the United States tonight for House seats. I believe all 435, of course. On the Senate, I believe there are 34 Senate seats up for grabs. But there's a general belief on Wall Street that if you have a situation of gridlock in Washington, that is good. And the scenario that I've heard more often than not is, I'm not sure why, but the idea of a Kamala Harris presidency and Congress-leaning Republican. The stats on gridlock being good are pretty fascinating. Since 1958, elections with divided outcomes have averaged 2-year S&P 500 gains of more than 20%, and that is on average much stronger than the performance you see over a 2-year period without gridlock. And I think at a time when you're seeing a lot of focus on spending, regardless of who's in power. I mean, if you look at the deficit projections for the United States, it's not going to be easy for whoever is president to move away from that. So anything that might curb some spending is seen as something that could potentially be a good thing for business. But there's so many variables, including some on the tariff front, which we can talk about as well. The price of silver compared to the price of gold. Do you think the price of silver is undervalued compared to the need of the industry? It's a great question, too. Just going to take a look at what's been happening in the world of silver. And that could get us into a good conversation around gold as well, which, there's so many ripples on gold this year, aren't there? I think that this is probably going to be more of a night for a conversation around gold, but silver, I would imagine, would also be in the headlines. Let's take a closer look at what's been happening with silver actually over the last couple of days, because I haven't been looking as closely at it. Okay, well, look, it's been a great year for metals, and I'm not sure that the long-term trend and need for metals, that theory is going to change too much. I just think in the short term, it's arguably the case that the commodities market is going to be ruled by whatever happens with the election itself, and then what's happening in the currency market and the fixed income market. And then subsequently, you see things like gold react to that. And I guess there's also trading in and around silver. And admittedly, silver is not my strongest area. I think that gold, which has had that record run this year, is going to continue to be worth watching, because it's probably going to be moving. It's likely going to be volatile, but it's probably going to be moving regardless of what happens, because if you've got a situation where the US dollar is moving, ultimately the gold price is going to be moving as well. If you've got a situation of uncertainty, it's going to be interesting to see. Like, if we don't have a decisive victory tonight, what does the market do? Like, that was one of the first questions we got in this conversation earlier tonight. And it's hard to know so far. But I would say that that I would say that the market hates uncertainty. If the uncertainty ultimately um, favors something, maybe it favors gold. Maybe it means there's buying of the U.S. dollar because of that uncertainty. Um, Most people often talk about if the US dollar is stronger, then gold is going to be weaker, but there's been so much moving the price of gold recently. So that's going to be something to watch as well. And Stan Skoreko asking about the political dynamics as well. Yeah, we'll have to watch that. So I just want to come back and remind you guys of the swing state story. So it is 7:30, and the early numbers that the market has wanted to watch have been, I would say, more than any other, because I think we saw, according to the reporting I'm seeing, Trump winning Kentucky and Indiana, and Harris taking Vermont. No big surprises there, but I think that the big stories that we're going to watch in the, call it the next 10-15 minutes, would be the North Carolina Georgia story. I believe the polls in Georgia have closed, and uh, I believe the polls in North Carolina were going to be closing at 7:30. There was the complicating factor of some of the voting sites in Georgia being hit by bomb threats, which did seem to disrupt voting as they were starting to close the polls. But those two states are very interesting because if you look at the electoral college map. Georgia and North Carolina would be very important to Kamala Harris. Without them, I believe she would need to sweep Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, or have an upset in Arizona. So, once we know what's happening in Georgia and North Carolina, that will be kind of the early drumbeat in this election. Now, if Donald Trump were to lose in Georgia and North Carolina, and remember, you're going to hear all the pundits on television talking about that 270 electoral college votes needed to win. If Trump were to lose Georgia and North Carolina, his path to 270 would be tough, definitely, because he'd then need to sweep the northern states, and that was a difficult. That was a difficult terrain for him last time round. But if you've been wondering why we've been seeing so much campaigning in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, tonight will be all about those states. ETFs versus cryptocurrency. And I'll come back to the question about Kirkland Lake in Ontario and gold mining in just a second as well. And thanks very much for joining. Listen, if you're not subscribed to this channel, I would love for you to do so. We're pretty new, but we are growing. This is our first live, actually, and we picked election night to do some complimentary coverage to the U.S. election. We'll be covering the polling numbers as they come in, but also the stock market reaction. And right now, we are still seeing positive performance in the pre-market ahead of tomorrow's opening bells. It was a positive day on Wall Street. But let's get into the cryptocurrency story, because the story of ETFs versus cryptocurrencies came up. Obviously, the launch of crypto ETFs this year, the spot Bitcoin ETF, was one of the massive catalysts for Bitcoin itself. Let me walk you through what's been happening with the Bitcoin market. And as I take a look at what's happening with Bitcoin, currently, it is trading north of $70,000 a coin. It's been bouncing up near its all-time highs in recent trading sessions. The volatility is likely going to pick up over these next 12 to 24 hours. Even just looking at the options market, there was a belief that we could see an implied move in Bitcoin of as much as 8%, given that Bitcoin trades at 70,000. As it looks like there is a projection that Donald Trump has won West Virginia. We'll keep tabs on that. Right now I'm seeing less of a swing in Bitcoin, more, call it, I would say about maybe 2% or so. That would be more of a average day move in Bitcoin, but right now there's a belief that you could see a lot more volatility swing there. And I think part of that would be, depending on how tonight plays out, there was a belief that, Donald Trump would be the crypto-friendly president. And arguably, anytime you saw Trump with the lead in the polls during this election cycle, that would be well received in the crypto world as well. So Bitcoin, in a lot of ways, turned into a so-called Trump trade. Earlier, we were talking about some of the different stock sectors that are seen as favorable to Trump versus Kamala Harris. Not to say that Harris has not made some crypto friendly moves, if you will, just in the sense that, we did see a crackdown on crypto under the Biden administration. And because Trump took the more crypto friendly approach on the campaign trail, we did see Harris follow Trump to a certain degree in being friendlier on Bitcoin. But you think about Trump was a skeptic on cryptocurrencies when he was in the White House, or you could make that argument. But on the campaign trail, I mean, heck, his vice presidential running mate is a longtime Bitcoin investor in JD Vance. There were endorsements from people who are crypto enthusiasts, Mark Andreessen, the famous venture capitalist, the Winklevoss twins. And just looking at some of the expectations in the market right now, I think the only thing they're expecting in the short term is volatility in crypto. I will say that there are a few bulls on Bitcoin that publish reports. Two that come to mind are Bernstein and Standard Charter. Bernstein has put out some research on what they think happens to Bitcoin if Trump wins and what happens if Kamala Harris wins. You're welcome for all the answers, by the way, and I appreciate all the questions. And thanks for joining me here. If you're just stumbling upon us here on YouTube, this is our live stream of the U.S. election and a stock market guide to what may ultimately happen. The story on Wall Street around Bitcoin, courtesy of Bernstein, the analyst team there, is that if Donald Trump were to win the election, that their forecast for Bitcoin would be in the 80 to 90,000 US dollar range. It's funny that we talk about crypto in fiat currency terms, but that's the way it goes. I mean, if we were to see that, obviously that would be an all-time high for the cryptocurrency. Bernstein's argument is that if Kamala Harris were to win, at the lower end, again, these are not my calls. These are just what analysts put out there. Kamala Harris winning the election. We mentioned that, while she's made some crypto friendlier moves, she's seen as the less crypto friendly candidate, that perhaps Bitcoin could test 50,000 on the downside. I will say that Bernstein, as a forecaster, remains quite bullish on Bitcoin. In fact, their year-end target, I believe, into 2025 is $200,000 a coin, regardless of who wins. Now, again, a lot of times you've got analysts that make big calls. Sometimes those come true, sometimes they do not. But getting back to the first question, the ETF growth was seen as one of the catalysts for that. There's another analyst, Standard Charter's Jeff Kendrick, who was predicting that if Kamala Harris were to emerge the winner in this 2024 presidential election, that we would see Bitcoin at the end of the year at around $75,000 a coin. So it's not too far from that level right now, and 75,000 would be a record level. And if Trump were to win, that the year-end price, again, this is a very bullet. Standard Charter, if you cover the crypto market, there aren't a lot of traditional strategists who put calls on Bitcoin. So a lot of people end up citing Jeff Kendrick there, who's a really thoughtful analyst, but you just never know. It's such a volatile asset. But his year-end call on Bitcoin with a Trump win is $125,000 a coin, which yeah, that'd be a lot. That'd be a lot. One other thing I'll just say before we move on is one thing I did actually on X today. I posted what happens to Bitcoin after elections, and it's such a young asset class that we only have about a decade's worth of data, but over the last 10, 12 years, we've had 3 election cycles. And in all those cases, 2012, 2016, and 2020, Bitcoin has been remarkably higher 12 months later. You can take from that whatever you will. And thanks to everybody for joining us here. If you are just joining, my name's John Ehrlichman. This is my YouTube channel, Ticker Take, where most of the time we're exploring different investing themes. We try to keep them pretty straightforward and simple for a wider audience, but we also really like to share different takes on the markets. For 25 years, I've been speaking to market professionals, and increasingly, you're going to see more of them come here to the channel to share their views as well. So I hope you subscribe, and I hope you'll tell your friends about the channel, because we have some big plans, and we're going to be rolling out some great stuff soon. I'm going to go back to the Piggy Bank Chronicles just to get back to those couple of questions there. And then Beth and Caroline, I'm going to get to your questions as well. First of all, I would hope here in Ontario, we get back into more gold mining or any natural resource extraction. Kirkland Lake area will be booming soon. Well, I do think that for the gold miners, they have felt pretty encouraged by this current cycle for gold. And I know I was sort of dodging and weaving on the silver question earlier, but I guess on the gold front, like, it feels like there's been so many different variables that have been fueling bullion to a record high that aren't necessarily going to change, and certainly aren't going to change dependent on who wins the White House. The geopolitical tensions. I don't want to get too boring here on election night, but I mean, if you think about what Vladimir Putin had been pushing amongst his BRIC nation allies recently, the push for de-dollarization, the idea that, I mean, look, if you're Vladimir Putin and you're concerned about U.S. sanctions on Russia, probably not a surprise that he has been urging other BRIC nations to lean away from the U.S. dollar, and whether or not there can be a groundswell of support for another currency, we will see. But one of the easy things for countries to do that want to be less invested in U.S. dollars is to shift to gold. So there's a lot of different variables that are helping the price of bullion right now. And then the other question the Piggy Bank Chronicles had, I'd prefer to invest in sports cards versus crypto. Sports cards, yeah. I did have I still have, I think I have most of my trading cards from a kid. And I have not checked the value of them in a long time. I used to, for anyone's of a certain age, they used to have like almost like these handheld magazines that you just sort of leaf through. And I mean, if anybody's old enough, like, we used to have to look up prices rather than pull out our phone and figure out what's happening in the markets. I'm just going to do a quick update here on what is happening as we continue to track election night in the United States here on YouTube, and we're doing it from a market perspective here. It looks like polls have closed in 9 U.S. states, including a couple of the pivotal battlegrounds that I was talking about earlier, Georgia and North Carolina. We've got the early results being tallied. The states where we do have some decisive stories to tell you about right now would be, and I'm actually just watching television and seeing that it appears that whether it has been called yet, I do not believe it has been called. But in Georgia, it appears that Donald Trump may be in the lead. That's according to CNN right now. And Virginia has Kamala Harris in the lead. Both of those are important states. Trump was declared the winner in Indiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Harris has taken Vermont. And I was saying this earlier, but I do want to remind you that if we, over the next hour or so, see one of these candidates, i.e. Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, emerge with wins in both Georgia and North Carolina, that is going to make the road to the White House a lot more challenging. In theory, based on all the people who do all this work on the swing states, in theory, it'll be a lot harder for the other candidate. Beth had a question about the Canadian economy and performance versus the U.S. economy for the next year. It's a good question, Beth. Obviously, the one thing about the markets is they are connected globally. And while all eyes are on the U.S. election right now, I think generally speaking, a lot of countries around the world are trying to figure out, depending on who's in the White House, what that's going to mean for their own economies. Now, the Canadian economy, as an example, I mean, I'm sitting here in Toronto right now, has while it has cooled dramatically, it did benefit from the fact that the U.S. economy held in well. And then going forward, I think the question becomes, um, you know, how is the U.S. economy faring? You could, I know we're starting to see interest rate cuts in the United States, but there are some outside of the last jobs report, mind you, was pretty weak. But I think that there's a general view that the U.S. economy has held up quite well. In fact, you could make the argument that if we were talking about I know you hear a lot of rhetoric on the campaign trail, and I know there are people all over North America who are feeling really pinched because of things like inflation. But when you do look at the numbers, the way Wall Street looks at the numbers, the U.S. economy is held in fairly well. And I think you wouldn't see the stock market performing as it has had you not seen both the U.S. economy hang in and then a pivot towards interest rate cuts. As for whether the Canadian economy outpaces the U.S. over the next year, I think the jury's still out on that one, just because it might depend on the rate at which the central bank in Canada ultimately cuts interest rates as well, just because Canadians are pretty deeply indebted right now, and we saw the Canadian economy cool down faster than the U.S. economy just through that blunt tool of interest rates. But that does bring up the point that at the end of the day, I know everybody's going to be talking about what the election results mean for the stock market. It could be just as important, if not more so, going over the next month or two, what the U.S. Federal Reserve is doing with interest rates compared to what happens with this election. But I'm not going to diminish it. An historic election, and that's why we're live here on YouTube. And if you're just joining us, hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for being with our complimentary coverage, if you will. Maybe you're watching network television. Maybe you're watching on your phone some of the headlines that are coming out about how Trump and Harris are performing so far. But we wanted to add this other element, which is what it all means for the stock market. And right now, the U.S. futures are pointing to a positive start tomorrow, but it's very early. I mean, generally speaking, only the diehards are watching futures at 7:30 Eastern time in the evening, looking into the next day because it's generally pretty quiet. But I think we've learned over the last couple election cycles, you want to stay glued to what's going on there. Caroline had a question about Trump and Harris and the story of NVIDIA, and I think and whether they can derail them. And can I do a little dance? Oh, I will get to that in just a second. We can do a little dance. I could do like a little dance while I'm answering this question on NVIDIA, which you're not going to see that on CNN. The thing about NVIDIA is that I think any of the chip makers at the end of the day would make the most money if they could be selling the maximum amount of product to the countries around the world that are demanding those products. And so for an NVIDIA, and I think if you've been watching the story over the last year, you've probably seen all the roundabout ways they've been trying to continue to serve the Chinese market without upsetting the U.S. administration. And it's a tricky game to play. And I do think that, I'm glad Caroline asked that question because I believe NVIDIA became technically the world's largest company today with the market cap of, $3.43 trillion with a T for NVIDIA. So it's now worth more than Apple. And that's an 850% lift in the stock since the end of 2022. It's pretty remarkable. I think if you look at the outlook for NVIDIA, it's because of the demand for their product right now, it's pretty much secured a lot of business for them for the next 5+ years. Whether the stock stays at these levels, that's going to be one of the most talked about, stories on Wall Street for the rest of this year and into next year. But I would say that the tariff story is going to be an important one to watch as well. So yeah, we can do some dances. We can do some different action here. I mean, this is my first time doing YouTube live. I'd play some tunes, but I don't want the copyright police all over me as well. And if you're just joining, Tell your friends. Join me here. This has been great taking your questions, and we'll stay live as long as you guys have questions for me tonight, because this is a great way for me to connect with you as well. You can ask me anything. This is the first time we've gone live since we launched this channel. I launched this channel about a month ago in partnership with Global X, and it's been terrific. We've been able to do great weekly videos where we focus on some big investing themes, and we try to always complement those with takes. It's why we call it ticker take. We want to make sure that we can bring you as many views on the markets as we're able to access. That's really what I'm all about. I did that in television for 2 decades, and I'm still doing it here. And we do try to actually we try to connect the dots, especially here on YouTube through our community tab. It's a great place too. We put a poll question up there. Actually, if you're here, check out the community tab. We just asked a very simple question about this election. Will this election net a positive result for the stock market or a negative result for the stock market? Let's make that poll question my best ever. How about that? That would be great. I love the engagement. Your engagement has been really helpful to me. My mission is to be available to you truly. Like, this is the best thing I can be doing professionally. I love it. It's really important to me, and I really want this to grow and thrive, and your support means a lot to me. Um, um, SMCI. Yeah, yeah. SMCI. It's funny, Beth. I put out a video. Um, I think I put out a video on just stock performers over a period of time. I think I did it to Thriller um, just a couple of days ago, literally as Supermicro was about to take a big bath. And that's the stock market for you. If we're posting videos and we're posting daily videos, like timing is important. We try our best, but yeah, Supermicro obviously taking a hit. Look, at the end of the day, like, are we talking about specific issues for Supermicro? Does it bleed over into others? I guess we'll find out. It looks like they're giving a pretty tepid sales forecast, and they're not predicting when they're going to file their official financial statements from the previous fiscal year. So, I mean, yeah, people don't like it when you're missing deadlines for financial reports, but the board committee that's overseeing this has said no evidence of fraud or misconduct. Things can be tricky in the short term when you have a board that has to say there's no evidence of fraud or misconduct, but it's definitely something to watch. Edmonton's in the room, and it's great to see you. And Stefan, it's great to see you too. I'm going to try to field these questions. Maybe I'll do a really on Bitcoin and also on Uber as well, and do a quick recap of what we're doing tonight. I mean, we're trying to do some complimentary coverage following what's happening in the election, and we do, I believe, see. Here we are. We got 10 minutes till 8 o'clock Eastern time. So we're going to see a number of polls closing soon. And so far, just looking at the results, I know you're probably watching on television as you check in on what's happening in the stock market as well. But looks like we have seen Donald Trump declared the winner in the states of Indiana and Kentucky and West Virginia. Kamala Harris victorious in the state of Vermont. Now, we are going to continue to monitor the news coming out on states like Georgia and North Carolina, because those were seen as some of the early swing states to monitor, just because their polls were going to close earlier than others, and they could set the tone for what ultimately happens in these battleground states. It's going to be a while still, folks, until we get to the bottom of what happens in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. So I'm sure you guys are curious to see what happens tonight. I certainly am as well. We can go through some of the math on what's going to happen with those states and the potential paths to victory, and also the Mirage. Has anybody been watching the story of the Mirage? I mean, I must admit, I remembered it from past election cycles, but you're reminded, like, for example, when you have trillions of dollars in the stock market that are trying to position around what happens in a presidential election, and the danger of early leads being misrepresented. That is always a possibility in these cases. It does seem like maybe there's, I mean, you can make a case that there will be less of it this time around, only because this election cycle round, because the early voting that we saw in the 2020 election seems quite diminished comparatively. I mean, still millions of people that did early voting, but the amount that we saw in the 2020 election cycle, just because of COVID and all that kind of stuff, it was such a different story, and it's not as significant this time around. But like, we could still have a situation where you're seeing one candidate leading in the polls, and ultimately that is not the net result. But in the interim, people are basing their opinions and investments around that. Okay, the story of Bitcoin. So I'm going to come back to that one. I know some of you earlier were joining me for that. The story of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin at this hour is looking. Just going to take a look at the price of the cryptocurrency, 71,300, and it looks like it has been as high as. Let me see this. Oh, it's really moving higher actually at this hour. I think that the general view on crypto, as I was saying earlier, was that the belief is that Donald Trump is the crypto candidate. I mean, whether you believe that or not, that is how the market had been positioning, and I think that it's going to take a look at the price of Bitcoin. Had a little bit of that drop off recently after it was testing the all-time highs, which was kind of true of a lot of Trump trade activity in the last couple of days. But as I was saying earlier, look, the story of Bitcoin as it pertains to this election is, there's a view that if Donald Trump is a decisive winner of this election, that is something that the crypto enthusiasts will be excited about. You can go online and look at some of the things that Trump has said about Bitcoin. Arguably, that bullishness on Bitcoin from Trump led to Kamala Harris, at the very least, having to follow in being somewhat more crypto friendly. But in the markets, I find sometimes people just, nothing in life is as simple as people make it out to be, but people have to make decisions. And so they decided some time ago that Donald Trump was more Bitcoin friendly than Kamala Harris, and that a Trump victory would be one that would be much more supportive of the cryptocurrency. And the numbers that I shared earlier on that, I don't want to belabor this stuff for anyone who's less interested in cryptocurrency, but I cited a couple of strategists, Bernstein and Standard Chartered, who both have a view that if Trump wins this election, that Bitcoin is going to have a notable move higher. So there's that part. Sorry, Stefan, you were asking, what are your thoughts on Uber? And thank you so much for joining us from Denmark. I mean, that's really cool. It's really one of the great things about being here live with you for our election coverage tonight. And by the way, if you just stumbled upon this because you're watching some live election coverage on YouTube and you like what you see here, or you're interested in the story of money and investing, please subscribe. It would be really great to get your support. Now, Uber comes up a lot in the work that we do to field what the general views on the markets are around stocks. I would say that overwhelmingly, Uber tends to be one of these stocks that is in the upper echelon of Wall Street favorites. And the way you measure that is typically, I mean, it's not really rocket science. You just try to take an average of what the analysts on Wall Street who get paid to cover these different companies say about these stocks. And right now, you've got almost 90% of the analysts who cover Uber who are bullish on the stock. I mean, it's not like Uber is covered by one or two folks. It is covered by more than 60 research firms. So Wall Street has been extremely bullish on Uber. If I had to paraphrase why, it probably is just because after all those years of spending, They have built such an impressive ecosystem, for lack of a better word, and they are able to be fairly controlling on their costs. And they're continuing to widen the net on what they do. And so, like, I'm just looking right now. The average 12-month target price. This is not financial advice. This I'm just literally telling you what the average analyst targets on Wall Street are right now. On average, analysts who cover Uber see the stock moving to around $90 a share. And if, by the way, if you're watching this and you're like, this is election night coverage and you're talking about Uber, I'm just feeling this question about Uber, and then we'll move on. I think that uh, you know, there's a macro story. We were talking about Elon Musk earlier. There's a macro story about whether or not Uber's business could be disrupted by, if successful, Tesla's robot rollout. But I think that's a longer term story. And I would make the argument actually that there's room for both Uber and Tesla to be successful. What is the best website or app to get into before investing on the market? Great question as well. And I think I would generally say whatever feels easiest and simplest to you, and that maybe you got a friend that's using a particular app that you find helpful. I would do that though. I'd ask friends and family. Is there anything wrong with going to your bank branch too? And just talking to a financial advisor or somebody at the bank just to get started. And it's like what kind of car do you like driving? Or I don't know. Trying to think what else people have to test out. But I think that's important because somebody might like a particular trading platform because it does this or that. I think you have to do what works for you. But I'll think on that a little bit too. And Edmonton asked a question about Monster as well. And then there's a few others to get to too. I love these questions, guys. And it's great to connect. This is our first time being able to have this chat, and it's good. MicroStrategy. For those who don't know, and we are just watching, we seem to be moments away from a number of polls closing in states, and we'll see what that tells us about the electoral map coming up and how the market responds to that. But so MicroStrategy. So this is a company that has amassed a large holding of Bitcoin, and its chairman and co-founder, Michael Saylor, is perhaps one of the biggest Bitcoin enthusiasts on the planet. Don't quote me on that, but he has taken a bold strategy, and the company has been a huge performer as cryptocurrencies go. So goes MicroStrategy stock. I mean, it's as simple as that. Although I will say that this one did come up recently because the question that I always get from so many people is, oh, great. Thanks for showing me what happened to a stock in the past. What's going to happen in the future? And I always like to say, because it's the truth, nobody knows what's going to happen in the future, and nobody knows which stock is actually going to double or triple. All you can do, and it's what Buffett does, is like you look at a business, you evaluate the business, you determine if you think that business is worthy of your dollars and whether or not the market is valuing it above or below what it should be worth. And then, I know some people like to trade. They don't like to set it and forget it. But I actually think, he's offered so much sound advice over the years. But all that said, the thing about MicroStrategy is that this too is one of those companies that, like Uber, fares very well with the Wall Street analysts. Now, the only difference would be with MicroStrategy, it's covered by fewer of them. And so I'm always very reluctant to talk about Wall Street being more bullish on this stock than any other unless it's covered by like a huge swath of research firms. Actually, one of the videos we did, hopefully you saw it, we did a video on Amazon recently, and we characterized it as the most loved stock on Wall Street. And that's because in the case of Amazon, and I'll just try to pull it up here while we're talking as well, and then I'll get back to MicroStrategy. Amazon is covered by my goodness, more than 80 analysts. That's so rare. It's like you don't have a choice on Wall Street but to cover Amazon, and 94% of them are bullish on the stock. MicroStrategy, as far as I can see, quite literally, all the analysts who cover the company are bullish, but there's only 10 of them. And so I always take that with a grain of salt. But on average, they do think the stock is going to move higher. That's not financial advice, but you were asking me about it. So just weighing in on that one. Beth was asking if and I'm just going to stop because we are, it looks like, getting a whole slew of reports on state by state wins. It is now north of 8 o'clock Eastern time. And there is more victories for Donald Trump that seem to be crossing right now. It looks like Trump, according to the Associated Press, has won Oklahoma. The networks are declaring Florida victorious for Donald Trump. The team over at CNN is reporting that Kamala Harris has taken Maryland. And it looks like there are reports that she has also taken the District of Columbia. That's according to NBC. Donald Trump taking Tennessee, according to Fox, and South Carolina, according to the AP team. And just looking back here as well, AP is reporting that Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut have been won by Kamala Harris. I believe I mentioned Alabama going to Donald Trump. And so I'm just trying to look at the electoral map right now. So far, I am seeing a lot of expected results here. We are still going to be looking at the breakdown on the swing states, and it's going to be a while still before we get people like to call it the blue wall, the Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania numbers, and a while still for Nevada and Arizona. I'm not going to get into it right now, guys, but in some of these state votes, it could literally take days. I mean, I'm not sure if it's going to take days, but that might be the case. And so I think that's why a lot of people are very curious to know if between Georgia, North Carolina, and then maybe later tonight, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, if a certain number of the swing states have gone to a certain candidate, and that certain candidate has won the states that they were supposed to win, if the map will be breaking down in such a way that it just becomes clear that there is a winner. So that still seems to be the case of possibility tonight, but we will see ultimately what happens. Yeah, so I think one of the other things I want to do is we reset the clock here at 8 o'clock Eastern time. And we are, by the way, also getting some Senate wins. Is just to remind you that beyond the presidential election, which, whether this ends up being the decisive Harris win, the decisive Trump win, or the toss-up that some people have been wondering about, that it is a very, very busy night for Senate battles. I believe there are 34 out of the 100 Senate seats that are up for grabs tonight. It is looking like we are seeing a Senate race victory for Elizabeth Warren, who, if you do cover the stock market, you probably know Senator Warren in Massachusetts. Democrat Andy Kim winning New Jersey's Senate race as well. And Chris Murphy, the Democrat, winning the Connecticut Senate race, according to AP. So we'll watch some of those Senate races coming in, and we'll see ultimately whether or not we've got a story by tomorrow that shows not just a presidential nominee, but a breakdown of Congress, because there is a view still out there that the stock market would enjoy gridlock. I know you've got a very divided America right now, and strong views on one side and strong views on the other. The reality is, in the stock market, the idea of having limitations on what one president does just based on the power structure in Washington isn't necessarily a bad thing. Gridlock, if you look back at election cycles since the late 50s, has generally resulted in better stock market performance over the next 2 years versus not having that. But we're going to be watching very closely, as we're also watching some of these election numbers coming in. As of the 8 o'clock map update. So just looking at the road to the White House. I'm going to have to check these numbers as well, but it does appear as if we are seeing upwards of 35 electoral votes for Vice President Kamala Harris, 56 for Donald Trump. I'm now seeing that updated to 95 for Trump, just based on that series of wins that were just announced for him in the last few minutes. And we'll see if that Harris number gets updated from 35, but that would suggest, as of 8:06 Eastern time, that so far in terms of the electoral map, that there's been more red than blue. 95 electoral votes going to Donald Trump, 35 to Harris, the majority needed 270. Let's keep close tabs on what happens in those key battleground states that we were talking about earlier of Georgia and North Carolina. Getting back to some of your questions, I know the Piggy Bank Chronicles was asking one earlier about whether or not any U.S. president would actually enforce their antitrust laws, and could that possibly crash the market? I think it's a good question. I would say that I don't. Well, I guess it depends on antitrust. I guess, like, what are we talking about? The most commonly talked about antitrust area, or at least the one that seems to get the most attention, would be technology. And the reality is, we have seen under this Biden administration a pretty heavy-handed approach, and quite a number of antitrust starts. I don't want to say start and stop, but I would say that at least on Wall Street, the concern levels have been somewhat muted. I mean, gosh, look at the situation around Alphabet right now. Obviously, they've got to navigate that as well, but I think Wall Street is generally constructive on that. Since we are now into the 8 o'clock hour and Eastern time, and a lot of people are wondering what's going on in the markets, I wanted to talk a little bit about what is on the move right now. So far, the U.S. futures are pointing to a positive start in tomorrow's trading. We are seeing so far with the electoral map, Donald Trump with an early lead, but there is a lot of voting tallying to go, which will ultimately have an impact on who is the next president of the United States. But based on that early lead for Donald Trump on what has been tallied, U.S. stocks seem to be gaining some ground. We've also seen, it looks like, shares of Trump media stock also gaining some ground. They've been incredibly hot recently. I think at last check, I saw that business was valued in terms of market value, despite having pretty minimal revenue, more than Harley Davidson, if you can believe that. I can go through some of the Trump winners and losers, some of the Harris winners and losers in terms of sectors. There's a couple more that we want to talk about, but I do want to get. Is Tesla up? Yeah, let's take a look at what's going on with Tesla right now. Glad you brought that up. Oh wow, yeah, trading near 260. Well, look, this is kind of an interesting one, isn't it? My goodness, up more than 4%. So, and Elon Musk, apparently his private jet has landed in Florida. I believe he voted in Texas and then made his way. He's going to be watching the election results with Donald Trump. Well, this is the thing. I mean, like earlier, we were getting a question about which candidate ultimately would be the one would be seen friendly for, call it, electric vehicle plays. And if Kamala Harris were to continue with some of the initiatives we saw under the Biden years and the Inflation Reduction Act, like that's one of those things that on paper supports EVs. And interestingly, researchers at Evercore ISI, that's a Wall Street firm, have been suggesting that under Trump, the auto sector could be a potential loser. But obviously, when we talk about Tesla specifically, in light of Elon Musk's very strong support for Donald Trump and Trump's very strong support for Elon Musk, and possibly if Trump were to emerge victorious, having Musk play this key budget cut role in his administration, um, that early, it just would seem as if these early race numbers showing strength for Donald Trump is weighing is lifting Tesla's stock. I do want to talk a little bit, actually, since we're talking about Tesla, about this possibility that under a Trump presidency, you would see upwards of $2 trillion slashed. There are, in theory, companies tied to budget plans in Washington that could be impacted by that. There was a team over at a firm called Piper Sandler that was suggesting that they felt that a number of big blue chip companies could be impacted by that. Again, we'll have to see what happens in the election itself. But they were connecting the dots on companies like Boeing and General Dynamics and Moderna and FedEx, CVS and Honeywell, just all sort of a list of examples of companies that maybe might be in a situation where if there was a huge amount of budget cutting in Washington, that could impact some of their business as well. I will add, though, however, it's quite interesting because, a Trump presidency presumably would mean uh, tariff trickiness, if you want to put it that way. And, there's already an attempt by a lot of people on Wall Street to determine what tariffs would mean for earnings. I mean, companies are based in the US, but they are global as well. And if those tariffs are directed at companies around the world, for those global companies, how might that impact them as well? So let's give you a quick update on some of what we're seeing here right now on election night in America. And over the last hour plus, we have seen some notable wins for both candidates as we await some key specifics in critical battlegrounds. Just looking at Donald Trump and his state by state victories, we have seen AP reporting that Trump has taken Florida, he has taken Indiana, Alabama, Missouri, and South Carolina. Kamala Harris with victories, according to the AP, in Massachusetts, Vermont, Connecticut, Maryland as well. The story of North Carolina is going to be a really important one to watch as well. Whether that ends up being a razor thin vote, we ultimately will find out. But it is certainly one of the important areas to be watching tonight. Our stock's going to be volatile. I mean, looking right now at the pre-market action, I think it's still a bit early for the markets to be moving in one way or another. I know we were just talking about Tesla shares moving higher. Right now, we're looking at the U.S. futures point to a positive start, but they're fairly mixed at this hour. We'll keep tabs on what's happening with some of the other commodity stories, the metal story of gold as well, and story of Bitcoin, which we were getting some questions on earlier, which at last check, Bitcoin was looking a little bit stronger as well, trading north of 71,000 US. I think one of the other things that I figured we should go through is some of the other sectors that could be in focus depending on what happens here on election night. One group of stocks for Donald Trump that I had not talked about yet were some of the gun makers. Smith & Wesson was one that Evercore was talking about as a possible sector to be watching. Some of the prison stocks, I mentioned Trump Media, but also we talked about the tariff story, and there was a general view that companies that don't source product from China could be beneficiaries. Ulta Beauty was cited as an example. Ulta was a company that recently had some challenges with their business, and but that's a name that's seen as a possible beneficiary. Veteran Wall Street strategist Sam Stovall had mentioned keep an eye on some of the coal players. Consol Energy would be an example of that. Strategist JP Morgan talked about steel stocks as potentially benefiting from a Trump presidency. And then we had also started this whole conversation tonight talking about areas like oil and gas and financials, both as being seen as winners for a Trump presidency. Oil and gas, you probably know that story. Trump has been much more favorable to the energy industry than Kamala Harris, and the view is that in the financial services sector, that a Trump presidency would lead to less regulation. We would see how that plays out. And outside of the Kamala Harris perceived sectors that would benefit, like renewable energies that we talked about. I think you'd want to keep an eye on some of the home builders in light of the fact that Harris has talked so much about creating more opportunities for first time home buyers. There was even a suggestion, I thought this one was kind of interesting, that cybersecurity companies that have benefited from more spending to protect infrastructure, so everything from power grids to water supply, that could be a beneficial development for stocks like Palo Alto Networks and CrowdStrike, which is still obviously dealing with the aftermath of the outage that really sank CrowdStrike, but maybe that's a sector group that does well as we wait and see how things play out. I think of the drug sector, there's been a general view that possible pricing pressure from a Harris administration would impact, let's say, the Pfizers and the Eli Lillys of the world. And you're watching the poly market updates. Oh, am I watching them? No, I haven't been watching them, but we should take a look at that. I would be curious to know what's happening right now on poly market. And I mean, I think we're kind of at almost a unique point, aren't we, in terms of the uh, live voting and trading that's taking place on the election itself. Now, just looking at what I see right now in the election results as of 8:17 Eastern Time, I do see what appears to be a very notable early electoral vote lead for Donald Trump at 95 versus 35 for Kamala Harris. I am seeing what looks like also a lead in Senate and House representatives for the Republicans over Democrats in the Senate and House, 43 to 34 and 42 to 23, respectively. You're right. I should get that. I should get that split screen looking. I'm actually looking at a totally yeah. I'm looking on another device right now. I know that would be good. That would be good. We'll work on that. I mean, this is my first time doing a YouTube live. I decided to do it here on election night because there's a lot to talk about, and it's also a good chance to field some of your questions. I know some of you know me from like just the last few weeks doing some videos here. Maybe you know me from some of the videos I did on shorts. I do all sorts of stuff there. Sometimes I do dances. The other thing I did was I worked in television for 25 years. In fact, it was just about a month ago that I decided I wanted to be here on YouTube and on all my social platforms to talk more directly to you about the investing landscape and help to connect you to all the people I know in the investing world. That's why we decided to call the venture Ticker Take. We're going to be increasingly bringing in more takes from more great professionals who we know and trust, and we're looking to build out that ecosystem with your support. By the way, part of building that community is hearing from you. So that's one of the great reasons why it's been terrific having you with us here tonight to share your perspectives. I'll tell you, if you want to vote on who you think ultimately will inspire investors in this election, you can weigh in. We have a poll question in our community tab section just on what you think is going to happen to the markets after election night. So we've got there. Do I no longer work in TV? Well, I'm going to be staying in television as a commentator, but I wanted to do this full time. I'm interested in really building out something of my own. I've wanted to do that for a long time, and the time was right to do that. And and I'm really excited about that. So we're going to be doing a lot more content right here on YouTube. That's why we're live on YouTube tonight. But I'll be still sharing plenty of content on other platforms. I'm pretty busy on Instagram, and I'm pretty busy on TikTok and on X as well. I write a Substack as well, where usually every week we try to round out some of the different context from different stories we're tracking and writing about and learning about. And but increasingly, I'll put a lot of that in my community tab on YouTube as well. Just so you can get that. By the way, just a final plug before we get back to election coverage. We have a great video coming this Friday. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, about the power of compounding. I hope you like it. I hope you've enjoyed some of the other videos we've been doing on a weekly basis. We're going to increase it. We're going to increase the frequency with which we're doing videos, and actually just doing the live tonight to test out how you guys like it and questions you might have was really important to me. We'll be doing some lives with guests as well going forward. So yeah. Okay. Thank you, Beth. Edmonton was asking, is this the biggest election in the last 20 years? Two different policies. I mean, I think that we always get pretty caught up in the moment, but this one feels important. I think that it feels like um, the um, the United States is incredibly divided right now, and and I think that we knew coming into election night that there would be um, um, what felt like a fairly small pool of voters who were truly up for grabs, in the sense that for all the campaigning that for so many their minds were already made up. Now we'll find out. We'll certainly find out in the hours ahead around that. But look no further to the swing state story. I mean, here we are watching the polling numbers for basically a half dozen states. I would argue that the large majority of reporters who are stationed across the country to cover this election tonight are in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. For a country with the population that the U.S. has, to have such a focus on just those few states kind of speaks to the stakes right now. One thing I can talk about this is what I do know right now about what could play out tonight in this road to 270 electoral votes. And I am just seeing a couple of race updates on North Carolina. We'll get back to that, but it's very important. But I think we're at 95 to 35 right now for Donald Trump. But probably around 9 or 10 p.m. Eastern time. So let's say 45 minutes to 45 minutes to an hour and a half. You would think we would start to get a little bit more clarity on how things are shaping out, because you would hope by that point things seem a little bit more clear in North Carolina and Georgia, and then maybe we're starting to learn about what's happening in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. And you were asking about past election cycles. What's so fascinating about those states of Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but that's all Biden 2020, I believe, all Trump 2016. And it is possible we could have some slow count activity there. We'll find out. But if we do, might take some time before we can figure that one out. Pennsylvania, it's my understanding, again, for anyone who's watching right now who knows these things better than I do, I believe they are not able to open ballots until the morning of the election. So if you'll recall, in 2020, I think it took a heck of a lot of time for Pennsylvania to work through all the votes that had come in. And that could end up being such an important state tonight. If you listen to all the pundits who have suggested it could come down to Pennsylvania, maybe it will. We will find out. But I think that in the short term, And this is kind of what I'm waiting, literally just kind of waiting with you guys right now to see if we can figure out what's going to happen with North Carolina and Georgia, just because um, if either of these candidates emerge as victorious in those areas, it really starts to open up a conversation around what happens next. I was saying earlier, like if you're Kamala Harris, if you don't have Georgia and North Carolina, I believe the way this map works, she's going to need to sweep Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, or have an upset in Arizona. Um, if you're Donald Trump and you lose in Georgia and North Carolina, this path to 270 gets pretty tough because I guess he'd need to sweep the northern states, which, as we mentioned in 2020, he had some challenges with. So those are the kinds of things we'll be watching very closely. James was asking a question about U.S. energy needs and the push on nuclear. Where do you think Canada fits with its energy side? We don't have as much going on in the nuclear space. Are we going to get left behind? Look, I think that I will cite some commentary from a very famous Canadian investor. His name is Michael Lee Chin. He is, you know, arguably the most successful um, um, investor Canada has ever seen. And right now, Michael is investing quite aggressively in a nuclear fueled future, especially since some of the technology that can be used in the medical industry comes from some of that push towards nuclear. But long story short, it is his opinion, especially if you're tuning in a state like in a province like Ontario, that this province has everything it needs to be successful um, at every level of the nuclear reality. So if Canada misses out on that, that would be a shame, because it's as far as trend stories go for the next decade, that has quickly emerged as one of them. You guys should remind me. I'm trying to remember what is the name of the company that Sam Altman has been backing, as we now hear about all these AI players. Is it Oklo? Let's see that. It's been happening with OKLO. Yeah, that stock has gone bonkers. Um, Imagine that. You've got providing nuclear fission reactors that can be fueled by recycled waste. I think you're going to be hearing obviously a lot more about this story of nuclear, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this move towards maybe thinking less about having nuclear plants and more having mobile technology that just allows nuclear to be deployed in a lot of different remote areas, certainly in the mining industry as well. And then that's the point. Like, it can be, there's a lot of ways that it can be executed in Ontario as well. All right. Hey, well, thanks very much for joining us. We'll stay live here a little bit longer. We'll stay live as long as you guys are interested. I think there's a lot of big questions about what this election is going to mean for the stock market, the smaller reactors for sure, James. I cited these stats earlier, but I know there's going to be a lot of focus tonight on what this election means for the stock market, what it means for different sectors of the stock market. Quinn, thank you so much. I appreciate it. The one thing that stood out to me, though, is regardless of who wins, generally speaking, we do see positive performance for the stock market um, uh, in election cycles. One of the stats, actually, with our partners, Global X, we have a YouTube video that went out on Monday. You can watch that on the Global X YouTube channel. The past 8 election cycles, we have seen, I believe this is the 6 months after the election, average gains of around 6.5%. And I believe they've been stronger in the last couple of election cycles. And then if you want to go 12 months out, the stat I have here suggests that only one election since 1984 has resulted in a stock market being lower a year later, and that was 2000. So during the tech bubble. And I know tech stocks have had these crazy runs and all that kind of stuff, but generally speaking, we're in a period that is fairly positive for the stock market. Now, the S&P 500, which everybody tracks, has had this incredible run up until now. Currently, it's up more than 21% on the year. Since I know we have some of our Canadian friends here in the room as well, you've got the TSX in Canada up 16%. So the landscape for North American stocks has been terrific this year. I mean, when you stretch it out and just take a bird's eye view, the NASDAQ 100 up more than 20%. So I think sometimes people see those numbers and they wonder, well, is the positivity baked into the story? I think it's going to depend on, sure, this election, but what happens with the economy, broadly speaking, in North America, and whether or not it can navigate through as we're seeing interest rates come down, because that's the kind of recipe that, generally speaking, is supportive. I mean, you've got a lot of things that are working in the market's favor right now. You're in a bull market, you're in an election year in the United States, you are in a rate cutting cycle. I mean, these are historically very positive things for the market. I know Warren Buffett, I've done some videos on this, has not seemed as enthused on some of his core holdings as he was in the past, whether that was Apple or Bank of America or even his own Berkshire Hathaway, maybe being a little bit more reluctant to buy back stock. So he's been hoarding cash, and Buffett seems to know a lot. But there have been periods when he's hoarded cash in the past too, and the stock market has gone up. So we'll see how that all plays out. I mean, I think in terms of the issues that I think the market's going to have to figure out, depending on how these races play out tonight, would be, if there is a story of this election that would take us away from some of those other factors. I'm not look, it's a heated environment right now, and this election is a crucial one. But the stock market sometimes looks through some of the rhetoric and tries to see what's on the table, and they're looking at a table that is set for interest rate cuts, and so they're trying to determine, well, what parts of whoever emerges victorious here would complicate the story of the economy. I think there's a general view that Kamala Harris is as a leader, someone who thinks differently about taxes than Donald Trump. And I think most people who are participating in the world that is Wall Street feel that lower taxes benefit businesses and ultimately benefit stocks. So I think they're going to have to work through that math depending on what happens and if Kamala Harris is successful in this election. If it's Donald Trump, who, I think there's a general view that Donald Trump is seen as a more business-friendly candidate. We can debate that. We can talk about that. He is also someone who is championing tariffs. And I think that Wall Street has been trying to work through what exactly that tariff math would mean, especially if, for some of these global companies, and I said this earlier, it could impact their earnings. It could impact earnings for S&P 500 companies. So that's something else to be watching. Let me know in the chat if there's anything you want to talk about. That's why we're live right now. It's to cover what's happening in the election. I mean, it seemed like a great night to be live here on YouTube, and I appreciate you joining us. And if you're just stumbling on us here, hello, welcome. If you like talking about where the world's going, the world of investing, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. It'd mean a lot to me. We just got started about 4 weeks ago, and we're already firing on all cylinders. It's been a great ride. This is the first time we've been live. We're going to be doing a lot more lives, hopefully, in the weeks ahead, and we're going to start bringing on some guests to be ready to field your questions just the way you're asking right now. I mean, this is perfect. If we can have some live chats with market professionals in specific areas based on the kinds of stuff you guys are asking about, whether it's gold or Bitcoin or silver or nuclear plays, I mean, it's great. I'm really excited about that. And thank you for joining us. And it's great to get the tips too, like in terms of what we could be adding in terms of elements for our live here as well. I'm going to take a look at what's happening on the electoral map in just a second. I would say that, one of the reasons we felt we wanted to be live here on election night was that um, since this market has been trying to position itself for the unknown, ultimately it could be rocky. I'm not saying it's going to be rocky. Right now, we're looking at U.S. futures pointing to a positive start, and they're not moving by that much. I'm looking at the S&P futures contract, which is a way of measuring where the stock market's going to be going to tomorrow. It's up about a 0.5%. That's it's an active night in the futures market, but that's still not that dramatic. But I think if you think back to the 2016 presidential election, the polls were favoring Hillary Clinton. Look, I think a lot of people will remember that night. You're watching these maps as you see them on television as well, or here on YouTube, and the market is reacting to that. And ultimately, we did see quite a down move in stocks, which sometimes fortune favors the bold. Sometimes you see some incredible action. I will tell you this much: there are plenty of players on Wall Street that are at the ready to make some moves tonight. That's not really what we focus on here. We really focus on trying to be simple and talking about the world of investing in a simpler fashion. But you've got people like Carl Icahn. If you've never heard of Carl Icahn, he's a very active participant in the world of Wall Street. And I believe if you go back to the 2016 cycle, when we did see that big drop in the stock market as Donald Trump was clearly becoming the next president. I'm pretty sure Icon was at the ready to step in and saw an opportunity for a stock market that could move higher, just based on the idea that he felt that Trump would ultimately be a more business friendly president. And if memory serves, Carl Icahn did okay with that. I think reportedly, I think it was like a $1 billion bet on stocks. You should do a live one time a week. Great. This is good. I mean, I'd like to. We'll stay live here. I would, at the very least, guys. I mean, look, if I'm not going to be live with you here, I'm just going to be watching on television too. So whether this is your only screen experience, your second screen experience, I'm so curious to know what's going to happen. I've said it a few times already here tonight, but I will say it again. I really feel like we're going to be able to see some more movement in the markets once we get a clear handle on what happens with North Carolina and Georgia. And I'm just going to take a quick peek here at what ultimately we are seeing right now. Listen, I will tell you, in the markets, aside from those stocks showing some gains, we've got treasury yields higher, the U.S. dollar gaining some ground against the Mexican peso. I think, one could make the argument that Trump's I don't necessarily want to say lead, because there's all this talk about, the mirage. The early leads can be misrepresented because of all the, voting that still has to come in. But look, if you're looking at the electoral map right now, you are seeing quite a lead for Donald Trump. It's as simple as that. So the stock market is reacting to that. So stocks are higher. That strength for the U.S. dollar against the Mexican peso is one consideration. We were talking earlier about Tesla. What happened with Meta? Today was good, but still way down. And Bitcoin's been higher as well. And Trump Media and Technology is moving higher. What happened with Meta? Meta. Let's take a look at this. Oh, Meta. Maybe is it that they are pulling back on funding for their VR app? I'm not sure. Are you just talking more generally speaking about Meta? Let's take a look. So Meta. The CapEx. I see. Yeah. It's funny. It's interesting. This is just my humble opinion, and this is not financial advice, that's for sure. But there are so many levers that Mark Zuckerberg can pull, and I think that it's look, if he could have his way, he would focus less on Wall Street's wants and he would just continue to put as much capital as possible into all of the endeavors he believes are truly important to the company over the next, I mean, I want to say decade, but sometimes these leaders are thinking like over the next 15 or 20 years. That's the kind of power he has over where that business goes. And I think that he has learned, and certainly the management team has learned, that when they do things that are so-called shareholder friendly and they watch their costs and they say we're going to be more disciplined on our capex spending and all that kind of stuff, that oftentimes gets a a vote of confidence on Wall Street. But we'll see. At the end of the day, I think that one thing about technology companies is that they are in pretty good shape, especially if this story of a fast changing future takes hold. If you believe in the AI story being one that's going to ultimately lead to a lot of transformation, I mean, these companies are already transforming, and they are at the center of a lot of that technology. So it's hard for me to not think that if there's any company that's well positioned for the future, it's the companies that are, you know, investing massive amounts in this technology, but we'll see what happens. He said capex going higher next year. He's following. So right. Okay, yeah. Yeah. For what it's worth, sometimes we look at what the analysts say. It's not financial advice, but 85% of the analysts like Meta stock, and they see it going higher. I want to get back to what I said I was going to look at earlier, because I know you guys are seeing some of this, but I do want to get a sense on how the electoral map story is playing out right now. The wins that we have seen for um, uh, Trump so far. Actually, I am just seeing in the last few minutes. Have you guys seen this? So it looks like it was reported by the AP that Kamala Harris had taken Illinois, which is that's not a surprise, but that's going to give her a lot of blue on this red versus blue breakdown of the electoral map, because I believe there's 19 on the board in the state of Illinois. But look, I would say that the Trump trade is picking up steam. Like that the early story. If we're still looking at a too close to call election, that based on the voting so far, there has been a reason for investors to lean into the Trump trade. And I think that I think it is interesting that we saw some of that action in the currency, a strengthening of the U.S. dollar against the Mexican peso. I mean, this is certainly going to be a story that we're going to have to watch. I mean, look, I'm joining you from Toronto here. I mean, there's going to be a big story of tariff talk, whether it's Canada, Mexico, China, around the world as well. But it's still pretty early, folks, and we're still going through these numbers. I mentioned that Kamala Harris was victorious in Illinois, according to the Associated Press, which also said she emerged victorious in Delaware. Not a lot of this is surprising. A win in New Jersey as well. So I think, this is whereas Donald Trump took Arkansas. But I think that there's this talk of the mirage where, early voting can make the map look like it's leaning one direction, and then we still have a lot more to go. I know I've said it more than a few times at this point, but it does feel like we still need to see what is going on in Georgia and North Carolina before we can really start to have a more constructive conversation on how this night is playing out. And I think there's really, at least for the markets, there seems to be just three main stories to consider here. One is a decisive Harris win, one is a decisive Trump win, and one is a toss-up where we just don't know, and maybe we don't know for a long period of time. I do know that if it falls into that bucket, um, there are some states where we could see, some really slow counts. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to be the case. Some of the states at the center of those slow counts we're not even talking about yet because they are in the western part of the United States. But I think it's going to be very important between, call it 8:45 Eastern time, between now and at least between now and 10:30. I know that's not saying anything remarkably out there, but I think that if you work off of that time frame, we should get a much stronger take on the swing states in the East, assuming the voting's going okay in Pennsylvania. Whereas we said last time round, uh, took quite a while for them to get to the finish line on all of that. But I think a lot of these states were ready for this, and I think that as much mail-in voting as we have seen in the millions, obviously, um, it does not appear to be the same level as what we saw in 2020. But like I think that if you're trying to think of comparable periods where a clear storyline emerges, I'm trying to think of some of the other election cycles. If memory serves, Obama's 2012 victory was one where it wasn't too late into the evening before that became quite decisively clear to investors. Um, you know, the economy itself is something we've been tracking very closely. Obviously, it has played a role in some of the conversations around uh, who would get whose vote. And I know we've talked a lot about the stories of inflation and people feeling frustrated. With the current economic environment. In the stock market, though, sometimes the conversation doesn't quite mimic what we're hearing on Main Street, and I say that because outside of the weak jobs numbers that we saw in October, which also seem to be somewhat impacted by, unfortunately, that hurricane situation. Um, you could still find a lot of data points that would suggest that the U.S. economy has done fairly well. And as we were saying earlier, you've got the U.S. central bank, the Federal Reserve, that is starting to cut interest rates. I mean, these are the kinds of things that Wall Street really likes, especially when we're in a bull market. Um, Callie's joining us, and hi to Callie. Thanks for joining. Callie's my daughter. Quinn is my other daughter. She's been here too. It's a family affair here at Ticker Take on YouTube. And my wife, Caroline Leslie, is she's my partner in this enterprise, and we work together. Actually, I'll give you guys a little scoop. We're going to be working on a video together that we're going to be showing you soon. We're going to be filming that tomorrow. That's all I'm going to say because we've been very secretive about our weekly videos so far. And we do have a great one actually coming a little bit later this week on the story of compounding. We've been trying to field our audience on the kinds of investing themes they'd like to see in some of our weekly videos. Basically, what we've been doing so far is rolling out a signature weekly video, but also in time we're going to have a lot more guests. We're going to have a lot more, individual investment themes. We're looking forward to doing all that. And you can find us here on YouTube. You can find us in a shorter form on YouTube Shorts. You can find us in the community tab on YouTube, and you can find us on a number of other social platforms as well. TikTok, Instagram, we're there too. I want to thank the people from Instagram, by the way, who've been very supportive of us launching here on YouTube as well. You guys are great too. It's been really good. Thank you, Beth. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's fun. Look, I think that this is a serious night in America, and this is an important subject. Not just the election, just what you do and with your hard-earned money, or how you can better yourself through making smart investing decisions. I mean, these are very serious topics, and yet my philosophy on all of it is that we don't have to take ourselves so seriously. And I think that sometimes because people get so serious about this stuff, sometimes um, it actually can make it seem more complicated than it is. One thing I've always tried to lean away from is, I mean, here I am talking about Wall Street this and Wall Street that, but um, I really I really prefer when we can avoid the Wall Street speak, because that's all it is. It's quite frankly a language that's hard to understand. I mean, heck, even tonight as we're watching these political races, all the insiders, get really into some of this stuff, but it's sometimes needlessly complicated. And so, I really believe that keeping things simple is important. Um, we talked a little bit earlier about how this is not just a night for determining whether Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, or maybe it isn't tonight that we find out which person ultimately wins the White House. But that's obviously the signature story we're watching. But we have a lot of House battles that we've been reporting on already with you. And then I believe 34 out of 100 of the Senate seats in this cycle are up for grabs. It looks like the Ohio Senate seat is as Bloomberg was citing it, a bit of a nail biter. Sherrod Brown doing a bit better than um, Harris in places like Mahoning County, where votes for both have been reported, but not clear yet whether that will be enough to win against Bernie Moreno. Other side stories of tonight. Florida voters, I believe, rejected a ballot measure that would have legalized recreational marijuana. That's according to NBC, and that move to reject the ballot initiative, which is actually one of the most expensive in the United States, is a blow to cannabis stocks and backers of legalizing weed. Polls had been in favor of the measure, which needed 60% of voters to pass. That's another sector we haven't really talked about tonight, but is worth talking about. I kind of sort of leaf through different areas that could be impacted by whoever takes the White House. We haven't talked about cannabis yet. I've somehow gotten all this pen on my hand. You ever do that? You ever feel like you just start twiddling the pen and then sort of leak? I used to have these joke leaky pens. Maybe somebody gave me a joke leaky pen. Anyway, cannabis was it's one of the sectors that has actually received the most attention this year. I know we talk so much about the AI stocks and we talk about crypto and all that kind of stuff. Sonia, thank you so much. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's great to have you here. But cannabis stocks, because of efforts by both Biden and Harris over the course of the year, there was a real drumbeat building for more favorable policies in Washington around cannabis. I haven't looked at the sector a lot recently. I'll take a look at some of the stocks right now. I think just looking at I'm here in Canada, so I'm just taking a look at you've got names like Tilray, for example. I'm very curious about what's been happening with that one. Maybe this is actually the worst example to give you of a Canadian company when I'm talking about moves in the United States. Been a pretty choppy story for them, but we could take a look at a name like Trulieve, see what's going on with that. And yeah, I mean it's a pretty big move this year for that stock of more than 120%. Greetings over the lake from Germany. How will this election influence some of the Chinese players? Thank you very much, Traveling Sundancer, for joining us from Germany. I think that that would easily be one of the biggest questions to watch with a Trump victory. You could, let me know what you think about that. Only because when I start thinking about tariffs, I do think about China. And I feel like the rhetoric from Donald Trump on China has been less so on China. compared to previous election cycles. Um, but nevertheless, I think that this story of tariffs is going to be one that has to be measured in terms of economic impact on individual countries, and then on different sectors as well. Um, it's it's hard to break down, though. I would say that there's going to be an opportunity if Trump is victorious for companies that don't do sourcing in China to be, well received in the market. But we'll see. And I think it's also interesting. Look, isn't it interesting that while China is arguably a country that would be in the crosshairs of a Trump presidency, that you have seen this interesting friendship between Elon Musk and Donald Trump on the over these last 3-4 months, which arguably Musk, of the best known CEOs in the United States, wouldn't you say he's probably spent as much time, if not the most time, of any of those leaders in China? What approach would he take with China? I mean, it seems like he does have the former president's ear on that, so we'd have to see what happens there. I mentioned this earlier, but I'll come back to it. It's just that I think that I have covered Tesla a fair amount, and do keep tabs on what Elon Musk is working on as well. And there's been a lot of this focus on what he might do in a Trump administration, in some kind of budget cut role. Some of the numbers we've heard thrown around, upwards of $2 trillion possibly being slashed. There was some Wall Street talk about the kinds of companies that might be at the center of that story, that might be impacted by that. I mentioned a couple of them earlier. I'll go through them again, whether it's a Boeing, General Dynamics, Moderna, FedEx, CVS, Honeywell, all companies that in some cases rely on certain government-related contracts, which potentially could be impacted, but we would have to see. And I guess just going back to the China story, like one of the things I saw talked about on Wall Street today actually was, not necessarily technology based or tech companies in China, but even like Boeing sells planes into China. And so, you could have a situation where a Trump presidency and tough talk on tariffs could impact American companies as well. So the stock market will be very busy working through all of that data. It's been mainly the questions we've received have been about different sectors and industries. I would say that there's when you start slicing and dicing the markets, what's interesting is you can reach conclusions that that may surprise you. The one that surprised me, there's a firm called Carson Group. Ryan Dietrich over there does some really interesting data, and they had found that if you had invested going back to the early 1950s, if you had only invested when Democrats were in the White House and not Republicans, and I'm assuming not too many of us were investing in the early 50s here, but maybe some of you were. I'm not sure. I assume that I've never heard of people who put their money into the market when there's like one party in power and then take it out when somebody else is in power. But if you had been one of those people, interestingly, the performance under Democrats over that period was stronger than Republicans. Even though I think generally we think of Republican candidates as being more business friendly than Democratic candidates, but I think the strongest number is just staying invested over the long term netted the best results. How's that? And the other thing we talked a little bit earlier was the fact that one situation for the markets that could work is is gridlock. We will see what happens. There are some headlines just crossing right now, and I just wanted to let you know, Lulu. Thank you very much for that question. I'll get to it in just a second, but I wanted to let you know that we are just seeing a few headlines coming in about state by state victories. It appears, based on the AP, that Kamala Harris has won the state of New York. That is not a surprise, but that is a meal ticket of sorts. That's a in terms of the map, um, New York, I believe, is about 28 electoral college votes. We're getting a number of other headlines coming right now. Donald Trump winning Nebraska, according to the Associated Press. Donald Trump winning North Dakota, according to CNN. That's just crossing right now, and South Dakota, and Wyoming, and multiple networks are reporting that Donald Trump has taken Texas. Now, that is not a surprise. I'm still not seeing too many surprises on the board right now, but Texas with 40 electoral college votes. I am guessing that because here we are, it's 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock Eastern time, so you're getting just a whole slew here of states with reported wins. Trump winning Louisiana, according to the Associated Press. Again, this is going to impact the board, and I think that at the end of the day, since we are still waiting a lot of these swing states, what is going to transpire here over the next few minutes, if you're watching on television as well, is you're going to see, I would assume, still a electoral vote breakdown that favors former President Trump. And so far this evening, that has been something that has resulted in the stock market feeling okay. So here we are, it's 9 o'clock Eastern time, and we are looking at the stock market futures higher. I would not call this a rip-roaring rally, but it is a positive tone. And I think that, if you were watching the story of the markets recently, there had started to be there was a bit of a shift in some of the Trump trades losing momentum, and the market trying to sort of determine whether a Kamala Harris victory was something that they had to pay a little bit more attention to. And so there was sort of like a, a bit of a shift in the market positioning. It felt like, clearly, this is not very scientific the way I'm explaining it right now, but it is something worth highlighting. And so I think that, if you want to make the argument that maybe people had sort of eased off the gas of the possibility of a Trump victory over the last few days, maybe that explains the early moves in the markets. I still think this is a lot of very soft positioning for the market so far. But look, Florida, outperformance there seems to be validating for some Trump trades. I'm looking at Georgia, which I've said a few times already tonight, but I think that those polls were supposed to close at 7 Eastern. It's 9 o'clock. I know they had some issues in the state. I believe there were some bomb threats, but I actually have not looked at the reporting on that recently, so maybe that impacted it. But I know that Bloomberg was reporting that only about 65% of the votes have been counted, but they said that Trump is currently leading that state in terms of the vote. I'm talking about Georgia, almost 52.5% to 47% for Harris. So as I said earlier, I mean, like if you're watching on television and you're looking at the updated electoral map right now, this is what I was talking about. It's just, even though most of the state by state victories have appear to have gone as you might expect, just visually, it looks like a um, notable advance for Donald Trump right now. And so I think that's why some people were leaning into some of the Trump trade activity. But it does feel like we're getting closer to that zone, as I was saying earlier, that we would likely start to get a better sense on Georgia and North Carolina. I think that's still going to be important. Now, we did get a question earlier, and Lulu, you've been so patient. I'm not even sure if you're still here, but you wanted to ask about stocks in the defense industry. But I'll come back to that in just a second. Um, we got a question earlier about Europe, and it does look like the futures in Europe so far are falling behind some of the early gains that we've seen for the U.S. stock market. And um, does that suggest that there's this growing concern about potential tariffs for Europe that's playing into that? I guess we'll find out with time. So we got this question here from Lulu on stocks in the defense industry. I think we started this whole conversation. When did we start? We started about 2 hours ago here. It's been great to have so many people with us over that period of time. If you're just joining us, we have been covering this live election night in America, and we've been doing it through the lens of the markets and how the stock market is thinking about this election. As we go along, we're trying to update you, and I'm sure you're watching as well on which states are falling to the respective candidates. But we're trying to add in, the market response. And so far, I would say the market response has been decidedly Trump friendly, just the way the electoral map has broken down so far. But in terms of defense, I think that one could generally say that the defense sector is seen as one that would benefit from a Trump presidency. And yet it's a complicated one, because I already just a few minutes ago was talking about how, if there are efforts by Donald Trump, if he wins, in partnership with Elon Musk, to cut budgets in Washington. That's the kind of thing that could impact different defense companies as well. So we will see. Sometimes what happens is, even though you've got these nuanced stories like the one that I just outlined, you've just sort of got a momentum story that takes hold anyway. And like I was sort of like I mentioned earlier, that there was a worry that a company like General Dynamics, huge defense company, might be impacted by slash budgets in Washington. I'm looking at some of the after hours trading, and that stock seems to be doing just fine right now. Just going to take a little drink here as we're continuing to watch the map play out here. I'm taking a look at what's happening. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just taking another look at what's happening with the stock market in after hours trading. It's been generally positive as we watch. Some of the early voting suggests that Trump is taking this early electoral lead as the race takes shape. We mentioned Bitcoin has been having a reasonably good showing. And right now we're looking at the cryptocurrency trading north of 71,000 as traders are watching the election story very closely. I think the other stories we're going to have to watch are some of the other Trump trade related stocks. I know in this chat we were talking earlier about Tesla and how Tesla's shares were moving higher as Elon Musk has been seen as a key ally of Donald Trump so far in this election cycle. Why don't we call it risk on? That's something they talk about on Wall Street sometime. I would say that there is a willingness on the part of investors so far in these first couple of hours to be buying into what are seen as, some of the more growthy parts of the stock market, as as opposed to playing defense, because it looks like we have seen not just Tesla moving higher, but some of the crypto stocks have been moving higher. Coinbase Global, Marathon Digital, Riot Platforms seem to be on the move right now. Um, it does appear as if some of those renewables that were seen as potential winners for Kamala Harris, solar stocks like First Solar and Sunrun seem to be lower. And so we'll have to continue to watch those names as well. Let's take a look here. The wins that we just learned about in a slew of additional states after polls closed at 9 o'clock Eastern time has left a electoral vote count that is very notably favoring Donald Trump at this hour. Just in terms of some of the state wins, we've seen Trump win in Texas, Florida, Ohio, Alabama, Missouri, the Dakotas. Whereas Harris has taken states such as New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Vermont, Illinois, and Maryland. Um, I know that Bloomberg has been citing what voters have been saying in their decisions and casting their votes. And it does appear as if the economy and immigration have both been some motivating factors for the electorate. Look, those were pretty strong subjects on the campaign trail. And one could argue that former President Trump was pretty focused on those in his messaging, and so I think that might play into this story right now as well. Um, we have a big move actually in Trump media shares, and let me get you the reaction to that one as well. Trump media and technology, DJT. If you've been following that story. It appears as if that stock has, yeah, it did have some movement higher earlier. We'll continue to watch what happens there. All right, we're gonna see if we can get a little bit more clarity here on what ultimately happens in some of those key states that seem still too close to call. It does appear as if the US dollar has been moving higher at this hour, so that's something else to watch. But we do right now have electoral map that is showing now what appears to be, according to Bloomberg, 177 electoral votes for former President Trump and 99 for Kamala Harris. The breakdown in the Senate and the House are also getting some attention with 46 representatives looking to get the nod in the Senate for the Republicans, 35 for the Dems. And the congressional breakdown seems to be faring well for the Republicans as well. So again, when you are still waiting on some slow reporting in some key states, it's a bit tricky to reach any net conclusions. I think we always knew that might be the case here, and it's been great to have you with us. If you have any other questions for me, let me know. We're going to see if we can hang out here a little bit longer just so that we can get a little bit more clarity on some of those key battleground states. And if you're curious about the breakdown, I know many of you are already familiar with the way the map is playing out here, but I believe you've got more than 90 electoral college votes tied up in those key, call it just over half dozen swing states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. Now, we've been watching the story in Georgia play out, and it did appear that one of the issues that slowed down um, um, the poll closures there were some bomb threats that did force a poll extension. But we'll see what happens in Georgia. I'm going to see if I can pull up anything here on North Carolina right now, um, as we continue to wait for an update there. Um, I mean, the polls seem to. Well, here, let's see here. I mean, coming into today, um, things were so tight. This is just such a. This is just feeling that like that great unknown at this point that we'll have to continue to watch some of that. I think that just to reset what we've been watching here tonight, you have three scenarios that possibly play out: a decisive Harris win, a decisive Trump win, or a toss-up where we just don't know. I think at this point, you have an early electoral lead for Donald Trump, and the market that is reacting to that. The caveat being that we still don't have enough information on some of those important swing states to reach a firmer conclusion on what's going to happen tonight. Now, the reason we've harped on Georgia and North Carolina so much as we await those results are simply because for either of these candidates, without those states, the path to victory becomes that much more difficult. So, just as an example, if you saw Georgia and North Carolina go to Donald Trump, if you're Kamala Harris, it would appear that she would need to sweep that blue wall. So, Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, which did go to the Democrats in 2020 under Joe Biden. Um, so there's a possibility there, but if there's a situation where Harris does not end up winning Georgia and North Carolina, and isn't necessarily in a position to win all of those northern states, is there an upset in Arizona that is in the cards? Now, for Donald Trump, if he were to lose in Georgia and in North Carolina, his path to 270 electoral votes would be tough, because sort of in the same vein, he'd need to sweep northern states. So that's going to be something to watch as well, especially since, look, that's an area that in 2016 Donald Trump did quite well. In 2020, not so much. We are now almost at 9:20 Eastern time, and coming into tonight, there was a belief that as we moved into this 9-10 o'clock zone, we'd be in a position to learn a little bit more about how things were playing out, not just in North Carolina and Georgia, but starting to get an early shaping of states like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. Although, given that in Pennsylvania they can't open ballots until the morning of the election, I think a lot of people were wondering if it was going to end up being so tight that Pennsylvania was the deciding factor. I mean, look at all the energy that was spent by both candidates in that state, that who knows could go longer than needed. Now, in the markets, what is the takeaway from all of this so far? It is that so far it looks like the Trump trades are in the driver's seat. That could change, but we'll see what happens with some time. Outside of the fact that Tesla was moving higher, we talked about Trump's relationship with Elon Musk, and that Bitcoin had been moving higher, and generally Trump is seen as a crypto-friendly candidate, and some of the crypto-related stocks have been finding interest from investors as well. I will say in the bond market, if that is of interest to you, it looks like treasuries are selling off, and it may underscore some concerns that Donald Trump would pursue tariffs, and that tariffs could be inflationary, and that could possibly expand the deficit, and perhaps expand the deficit more than what we might see under Kamala Harris. I mean, that's one of the fascinating things about what's happening in this market, that you can have interest in growth stocks, that you can have interest in meme stocks like Trump Media, and that you can also envision a world where getting deficit spending under control is challenging. And whether that is under um, arguably a president that wants to continue spending versus a president that would be focusing more on um, taking on a tariff fight. Even just looking at the projections for deficits right now, I think these are some of the reasons why you have seen, in some cases, some of the investors in things like gold bidding it up to an all-time high. So that's the situation that we're watching right now. Stocks, the U.S. dollar, and treasury yields essentially rising so far on the early Trump lead. We're going to stick around for another couple of minutes here, but I think this is going to be really interesting to watch going forward. Um, the other thing we were talking about was if there is a growing concern around things like tariffs, that the fact that you've got the Mexican peso tonight that has been extending its decline to 2%, as you've seen some strength in the U.S. dollar. That's going to be something to watch as well as we go forward. And so, yeah, I think this is one of the points where I should just highlight that beyond what happens with the election itself, the fact is the stock market has had a very strong year. I mean, the S&P 500 is up about more than 20%. I think that as much as this election is going to matter to the markets and has some long-term ramifications for the economy, that right now we are also in an environment where you have seen interest rates starting to come down, and you will see the U.S. Federal Reserve likely continuing down that path of rate cutting, just as in Canada we've seen it. And so, I think when you look at the broader stock market question of, what happens after a presidential election, we've shared a number of numbers with you tonight. There was only one election since 1984 where the market was lower 12 months later. That was the 2000 tech bubble. One of the other stats that I shared earlier was that, past 8 election cycles, you've tended to see some reasonable gains for stocks in the first 6 months after the election. I saw some notes from Citigroup suggesting that even though stocks have had this nice run ahead of the election, that if the rate cut story helps, that might be another catalyst. And even just looking back since I want to say 1960, you pretty much have every election cycle outside of 2000 and 2008 where stocks ended the year positive. So I guess it becomes a question of when the S&P is up like 20% for the year, can it add material to that advance this year? And I will say that if the takeaway so far is that an electoral lead in the early going here for Donald Trump gets people buying stocks, that would fit a little bit with what we had seen from some of the folks on Wall Street heading into tonight's election. At the beginning of this conversation a couple of hours ago, I talked about how, there was a view from Evercore ISI that if Donald Trump were to win, that they felt that the S&P 500 would be able to move towards a level like 6,300 by the end of the year. Donnie is joining us from Korea. Thank you very much for joining us. It's great to have people from around the world. We've had some wonderful hellos, whether it's North America or Germany, or now Donnie joining us from Korea. I appreciate you joining us as the world is watching election 2024 in the United States. There has been a headline just crossing here that reportedly Donald Trump is going to take North Carolina, and I want to wait until we get some more details on that. I actually hang with me for just a second here, folks. I just need to grab one little thing. I know this is a little bit. I need to leave the. All right, let's see if we can. All right. Okay. Just can't seem to get that going. Anyway, sorry if I've lost you, but oh, I'm gonna wait to see more on that. But okay, I've lost my television feed here to see what some of the networks are saying. But North Carolina is the one we've really been waiting for tonight. And let me just, I'm just going to see if Caroline wants to join us. For a second here as we continue being live here on YouTube. The audience is so quiet right now. But this is a very important moment. This is the moment we've really been waiting for. So let's see what happens here. Because this is, well, let's break down what we've seen over the last few minutes in terms of the state breakdown for each of these candidates. So as I go through the latest results, we have now according to Bloomberg, we have an electoral breakdown that shows a story that shapes up to be around 178 to 99 for Trump. And we still have to get these key swing states into the mix. And quite honestly, it still could be a long night just depending on how that all plays out. But I think that the market has been choosing a direction just based on what's going on so far. I mean, even looking further afield, looking at the market reaction globally, it looks like the euro is suffering as these votes are being counted in the United States, just because, this story of tariffs, which we've gotten a few questions on so far tonight, could also be in the mix here as we continue to watch some of these numbers come in right now. If you're just joining us, I think the stories that have played out so far would be as follows. You have a market that is responding to an early lead in the electoral map breakdown for Donald Trump. That has led to some of the Trump trades finding buying action in the stock market. And even the stock market itself seems to be in a somewhat positive mood. But as you look around the world, I think there seem to be some investors who are trying to figure out if Trump were to be successful in this election campaign, would that introduce a new complicated tariff story to be tracking around the world? We'll have to find out in time with that, but that seems to be the way the markets are breaking down so far. Given that we are basically on the doorstep of 9:30 here, you've got in more than 40 states in the District of Columbia, polls that have closed. I believe that leaves about 9 remaining open. According to Bloomberg, 177 electoral college votes for Donald Trump, 99 for Harris. As you know, the winner has to get to 270. And so I guess if we look at the breakdown for the key battleground states, some of the data that I've seen so far, which I think could be quite helpful to you, is as follows. So let's talk North Carolina. It has appeared as if Donald Trump is ahead in North Carolina. at least with the votes that have been counted so far. We'll continue to watch that closely. In Georgia, it does appear that we have seen a majority of the votes counted at this point, reportedly more than 70%, and Trump is reportedly ahead there too. Now, that's important. Remember, we talked about depending on how things play out with both North Carolina and Georgia. Again, if that were to go to Donald Trump, it would make Kamala Harris's path to 270 a lot more difficult, and vice versa. What about in Pennsylvania, where all that time and energy was spent by these candidates? It does appear that a much more muted amount of votes have been counted there compared to Georgia. I don't think that's going to be a surprise to anybody, just in light of when the polls closed in both of those states. But it seems to be at around, call it 24% of the votes counted. Bloomberg is reporting that Harris is ahead in that count so far. So that's something to take note of. It does appear that in Michigan and Wisconsin, so two more of those key northern battleground states, that a smaller portion of the vote has been counted. But in both of those cases, Harris is ahead. So if you're going to go based on what appears to be some of the most reported data so far, there's a possible lead here for Georgia and North Carolina for Trump. And then possibly some strength for Kamala Harris in those northern battleground states. Arizona is also an important storyline to watch as we go through the night. Polls have not closed there yet. And so they're still focusing on how that part of the equation will play out. However, I think that one of the most active trades that we've been tracking so far tonight has been Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is, at this hour, starting to move in a fashion that was, quite frankly, predicted by some of the traders who are active in cryptocurrencies. So right now, we've seen a move in Bitcoin of as much as 5%. And we did see the cryptocurrency moving up, getting back towards $73,000 US a coin. We mentioned that in the option market, there was an implication that we could see a move of as much as 8% post-election, which would be about 4 times the average. And I think that with that in particular, with Bitcoin in particular, there's been a decision made that Donald Trump is bullish for Bitcoin. And so anything that would suggest that Donald Trump is in the lead would be helping that cryptocurrency. North Carolina hasn't counted all their city centers. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for that as well. Yeah, we'll continue to track those numbers. Bonnie, thank you for your question as well. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. So just to recap on the cryptocurrency front. So we have seen Bitcoin moving higher. We've seen Ether moving higher. The meme crowd favorite Dogecoin has been moving higher. But I think that's, in large part because Bitcoin is largely seen as a Trump trade, and it's a very active trade. And so when people look at the screen and they see some success, oh, hey, Caroline's here. Hi. I lost my network feed. I was just wondering if here, I'll give you this. You can say hi if you want. You want to come say hi?
Hi.
All right.
I was just parking.
Oh, you were? Oh, did you just get home?
Yeah.
Oh, Lola, come on up here. Lola, come here. You want to come on up? Come on up. So this is the difference between network television and doing live streams from home is that we can bring golden doodles into the conversation.
What were you on?
Just on the main U.S.
CNN?
networks there. You can put CNN on. Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, that would be good. Okay. All right. Oh, Lulu says cute dog. Lulu says I like Lola. Oh, this is good. So you're coming back. You're back.
Where's the volume? Do you want? You don't
No,
want
I
it
don't
on.
want to. I don't. I
Right,
don't
you
want
don't
it
want
on.
people to hear
Yeah,
this.
and CNN. Okay, yeah, they're going over some of their past projections here. Okay. Um.
Yeah, I got home a bit later.
Oh.
I took a different road.
Oh no.
A bit of an error.
Oh my
But anyway.
gosh.
Hi
Oh.
everybody.
Hello. Well, yeah. One of our daughters, Callie, takes a competitive swim, and she's a great swimmer, but it's really far. So anyway, yeah. Yeah. Donnie's liking our wholesome content. Okay. So let's get so anyway, long story short, crypto's moving because of Trump's early electoral map lead, which we will see how things play out. And thank you for the clarification on North Carolina. Okay, so Bonnie's question on Canadian oil, gas, and pipeline sectors and how they could be impacted by either a Trump or Harris win. It's a great question because there's a general view that the energy sector would benefit from a Trump victory. And one could even make the argument that Donald Trump, if we think back to um, his um, his time in the White House, um, seemed to be very supportive of the interconnectedness of the Canadian U.S. energy industry. I think the flip side to that, Bonnie, is just going to be the same thing that people keep talking about, which is the tariff story. It's just it's a known unknown, and I think that that's something that people are going to have to try and figure out. But I think that if you were going to ask me, I would say that if Donald Trump is supportive of energy policy, I think that he could potentially be seen as friendly towards energy in Canada and the U.S. But we'll find out. Charlie is coming into the conversation as well and wants to ask about CNR. Strikes fundamentals look good. 4P. Charlie's just getting right into it. I love this. We're just getting into real good old fashioned metrics on election night. Why not? Like, we don't have to cover every minute of election night in America, but CN and well, let's take a look. So he's asking about CN Railway, which generally is a uh, I mean, there's nothing that's going to make a massive dent in the businesses of railroads. They are very attractive businesses to um, uh, long-term investors. In this case, Bill Gates over the years. I mean, you've got massive pension funds that are big investors in CN Rail. Obviously, we know about Warren Buffett's big investments in the sector. Um, you know, um, uh, Margins obviously is always a bit of an issue with this industry. I would have to, Charlie. I'd have to check to see what's been going on since the strike issues. Even if I just take a look at something that was said by the analyst community late last night, J.P. Morgan, for example, said something about how I guess the guidance cut that they had wasn't, in their opinion, enough to offset some of the headwinds that the company was facing. And so I guess we'll see what happens. Interestingly, in this note, they were talking about some of the trade tensions in North America being a complicating factor as well. But yeah, that was probably the worst answer I could have given. Uh, but I would say that generally investors seem a little bit cautious on CN Rail right now, and I think that you know uh, the the need to shift away from some of the previous expectations on performance tied to the labor tensions were just one of the considerations. Where do analysts on average see this stock in a year's time? Just out of curiosity. um, they they see it higher than where it is now for what it's worth. That's not an investment. That's not investment advice. But even though these analysts sort of put the brakes on the stock, they still kind of like it. Bonnie, thank you so much. Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Charlie. I mean, for what it's worth, like as some of you may know, I've transitioned out. I've been covering business and finance on TV for many years, and I wanted to try something new, and I'm doing it right now. And we started basically a month ago, and we hit the ground running really hard. But Charlie, I haven't been covering the railroads as much in that amount of time. I'm like just a fingernails further away from all of my previous touch points as I sort of hit the ground running with this new stuff. So let's see if we can get you up to speed on what is happening in terms of some of the what's really interesting to me. And we had Donnie from Korea joining us earlier. I think we saw the Korean won weakening as well today. It just feels like there's generally a little bit of strength for the U.S. dollar here that seems to be impacting currencies around the world. That seems to be one of the larger stories we've been watching a little bit this morning, a little bit this evening. Uh, I think that I think as much as you have a willingness on the part of investors to bid up stock futures and maybe bid up Bitcoin and bid up Tesla with some of the early advantage for Donald Trump. The U.S. dollar, it's kind of a safe haven, and so maybe traders are betting that there could be some benefits there from kind of a low tax, high tariff policy under a potential Trump administration. That'd be one thing to watch, but I think that's been one of the most active areas to watch so far is the dollar. Now, oh, Paul, it's like you saved me here. I feel like we're in this like quiet zone where we are still waiting to find out what happens in Georgia and North Carolina. And so is the market. So the renewable sector is a good one to get into. Again, this is kind of a bit of a short story, but I would say that the renewable sector is by and large seen as Kamala Harris country. That as all these pros on Wall Street were putting together their own heat map for the kinds of stocks and sectors that might benefit depending on who takes the White House, that on a fairly consistent basis, they would look at a Harris win as a win for renewable plays. Being able to sort of build off of the Inflation Reduction Act. So I was saying earlier that we were seeing some of the companies that might fall into that sector weakening in the pre-market. I'm not going to reach any firm conclusions here on this selling. I would say there's nothing dramatic so far, but I do think that sort of in that early positioning, it's like chess pieces. It's, maybe people, pushing a little bit into crypto, maybe being a bit cautious on the renewable plays. There's an argument that despite all the talk of renewables being a Kamala Harris area, you never quite know. I regret not having at my fingertips the breakdown for each presidential term, call it for the last 20 years, of the sectors that end up doing the best during these presidencies. But it always blows my mind because inevitably the performance during any presidential cycle, like the sectors and stocks that all these experts and pros put together, it doesn't always play out that way. Um, you can make a best guess effort, and we are right now. We'll see what happens with renewables. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you know, one of the others I should mention, Paul, that was getting some attention on some lists as I was looking at some of the um, winner and loser breakdowns today, like Next Era Energy, and you know, just as a company that might benefit from tax credit extensions for renewables. Um, and that's a stock that's done pretty well this year. Um, I mean, I don't own that stock. I don't advise on stocks, but it's a stock that Wall Street likes a lot, um, and sees going higher. So, if Kamala Harris does not emerge victorious tonight, does that spell bad news for Next Era Energy? It's hard to reach a firm conclusion on that. Um, the markets themselves have been starting to reach a conclusion that maybe this is the kind of night that's going to go Donald Trump's way, but I think that it's still a little too early to tell what happens on that. I'll tell you what we're going to do here. We're going to stick around until 10 o'clock. And if you guys still want to do this, we can keep doing it. Listen, I didn't set out to do full election night coverage. I just wanted to introduce myself and be here to talk about something a little bit different, as everybody's talking about the same story together at the same time. But I launched this YouTube channel, and it's been really great to interact with some of you. And if you're just stumbling upon this channel tonight and wondering what this is, thanks for being here too. This is really great. It's great to interact with a lot of people here who have some of you have known for a long time, some I just met in recent weeks. Either way, awesome that you're here. I hope you're enjoying yourself. I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel. I hope you'll tell other people about it, because we're going to be doing a lot more lives going forward. I need more suits. I have a few. I'm always in the market for more. They're fun. So as we take a look here at what's happening on this map, it seems like we're kind of in this wait and see mode for what happens with North Carolina and Georgia. And if you're watching network television, I'm sure you've seen that same story playing out. Just taking a look at what appears to be the breakdown of storylines that could play out from here and how the market might respond to that. So, a lot of people have been talking about the concept of the mirage, and the idea that early leads can be a misrepresentation. I'm certainly not trying to take away from the early electoral map lead for Donald Trump. It's just that without having any of those swing states figured out yet, I don't quite think the market can come to the firmest conclusions on where we're going to end up after this, especially when there is still a very good possibility that if it's really close, with some of those slower states on counts, that there's still the possibility this could stretch out over a few days. And I think that's why you've seen, willingness on the part to make some trading decisions in currencies ahead of the U.S. election result globally, and why cryptocurrency has been getting a lot of attention, but that the U.S. futures themselves are still, I gotta correct myself, guys. I hadn't looked at the U.S. futures in the last few minutes, but those are now looking decidedly positive. Like those are looking So right now I'm looking at the S&P futures contract. I'm sorry I can't put it up on the screen here for you, but I'm looking at a gain right now of more than 1%, and a lot of action in the S&P futures contract. And to me, it's as if people are feeling validation if they were playing into the Trump trade. Actually, we got a question earlier about some of the prediction platforms, and I have to admit I'm less familiar with those. I mean, I just don't, I spend most of my time talking about the idea of investing and investing in companies and for the long term and all that kind of stuff. But I think that one could make the argument that the fact that Betfair and Polymarket, Kalshi even predicted, all pricing Trump as having a fairly good probability of winning, like a greater than 70+% probability of winning the election, means that and so I'm looking off screen just at some of what CNN is saying right now about North Carolina, where at least as they are counting through the vote, Trump seems to be in the lead so far, and seems to be in the lead so far in the counting in Georgia. Again, I think I've said Georgia and North Carolina in more sentences tonight than I ever have before. But again, this is what we were talking about. Like, if you were to see one of these candidates win those two states, it would be a really big development earlier. And so I think, in all the different scenarios you can have tonight of an early, clear, decisive win versus a toss-up where we don't know, and then maybe we don't know for days, I think you're just seeing a little bit of momentum here. You're seeing a little bit of momentum. And as I was mentioning, with those betting markets assuming it's a done deal, the markets start reacting as you might expect, with crypto moving higher, stocks moving higher, bond yields moving higher. And that's kind of what we have right now. Now, what else will we have to watch in the markets? I do think that the story of the Senate and congressional breakdown is going to be an important one as well. For anybody who wasn't with us earlier, oh, hey, Dan, thanks for joining us. Good to see you. Welcome to my first YouTube live here. We decided to go live on YouTube tonight just to check things out. We haven't done one since I launched my YouTube channel, and it's been fun to do it tonight. Good to see you too. It's been a fascinating night. It's fun. Like, the market is now starting to rip higher as investors are placing these bets that Donald Trump is looking at a pretty good early lead, but we'll find out. But I guess what I was going to say was that the story of what happens in Congress is going to be important as well, only because there is a concern around deficit spending and spending in general. And I know that Donald Trump has talked, he could be teaming up with Elon Musk too, to cut a lot of spending in Washington. But I think there is this general view that if you can have mechanisms that keep any president from spending, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Or if you can have mechanisms in place that would allow for a president to have to seek compromise, and maybe, compromise that would, arguably appease people who are, business friendly. I bring that up because the idea of a divided government is something that I think a lot of people were thinking about as a possibility tonight too. You know, and here's the number for you: since 1958, um, elections that have divided outcomes, and outside of all the House battles tonight, we've got I think 34 Senate seats um, up for grabs. Since 1958, um, when you have a divided outcome of a president from one party and Congress controlled by another, over a 2-year period, the stock market tends to be stronger than if otherwise. Um, and yeah, yeah, page activations is here. We got a whole page party taking place in here. Lulu's asking thoughts on the future performance of the stock market of both Canada and the US have conservative leaders next year. Yeah, listen, you guys are very dominant. And Dan also works at TikTok. I love to post on TikTok as well. Actually, interesting story for anyone who is interested. Um I know there's a more important story tonight, like who's the next leader of the free world. But um, a couple of years ago, when I was still working in television, I started posting videos on TikTok, and that's really kind of what got me connecting to more people about the broader theme of investing on a more consistent basis. And so since then, it. It really opened my eyes to the opportunity of having a better conversation with all you guys here. So yeah, there's that. So Lulu's asking the question: thoughts on the future performance of the stock market if both Canada and the U.S. have conservative leaders next year? Um, it's a good question. I think that, as I was saying earlier, there's still a lot of things that would seem supportive of the stock market, but this it's not financial advice or anything like that. It's just that, you know, coming into election night, for example, in the United States, there were still people who were suggesting that I know like Wall Street always has a way of sort of downplaying the biggest stories, but um, there was a question being asked if the Fed's decision on interest rates ultimately would matter more than the election. Now, I'll let you guys decide on how you feel about that, but if the economy, I know everybody feels a little stretched these days, but if the economy actually on paper holds up better than some had feared and interest rates are coming down, um, those are the kinds of factors that could probably support the stock market, um, regardless of, whether it's, you know, conservative governments in both countries. But I think what you're seeing, even just as we're watching the markets right now, we're looking at a very strong showing for stocks as traders are reacting to what they're seeing on the screen right now, which is an electoral map breakdown that so far is favoring Donald Trump in a big way. I'm just going to continue to remind you that, like, until we get these swing state votes um, um, into the map, a lot of this does seem premature, but I think Lulu, to a certain extent, there's just a general view and philosophy that if you have leaders that are um, from the conservative side of the aisle, they're going to be leaning into business friendly policies, and that's something that the stock market is going to watch very closely. Uh, Derek is asking about my take on the Canadian dollar. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Honestly, Derek, it's this is a great question. I think that even tonight, what's interesting about the U.S. dollar is that it seems to be getting some safe haven status. I just want to take a look at how it's performing versus a basket of other currencies, but it seems to be gaining some ground. And I think there is this view of uncertainty around um, tariffs. You're welcome, Lulu. Um, I think that um, I think the I think that you're already like this could just be a microcosm. Like this might not be it, but maybe this is it. Like maybe what we're seeing literally at this moment is um, let's just play it out from here. So what if Donald Trump is returning to the White House? Um, the stock market seems to see that as a positive. The cryptocurrency market seems to see that as exciting news, but the world is wondering about that. And uh, you're seeing some weakness in some global currencies right now because people are trying to figure out what happens with tariffs and that kind of stuff. So I'd put the Canadian dollar into that as well, because even if it's, I mean, look, tariffs, that Canada's a friendly neighbor of the U.S., but tariffs is going to be a concern for a country like Canada as well. But I think just if the U.S. dollar has strength, usually that works against the Canadian dollar, and it's not as if the Canadian dollar is sort of backed up by a rip roaring economy right now. It's also a time where interest rates are likely to continue to come down in Canada. So um, the momentum hasn't really been that strong for the Canadian dollar, but we'll see what happens on that front as well. Derek, thanks for the question. I was less prepared for a loony question and less prepared for CN Rail tonight. I'm trying. It's good. I like it. Keeps me on my toes to try to field some of these. It's great to have you guys with us. In the time since I've been blabbing away, it looks like there are some more state by state victories that have been emerging. And here we are at 10 o'clock Eastern time. So I'm just going to be watching closely to see what happens here. But television networks have stated Kamala Harris has taken Colorado. And I'm just taking a look. I'm not a U.S. political guy, but yeah, that is a Democratic expected win. Donald Trump taking Utah, Donald Trump taking Montana. Those are all as expected. The story of North Carolina and Georgia, which we've been talking about for literally 3 hours, still seems uncertain, but I'll look for an update there. And I don't know what you guys think of is the biggest story of the night so far, but I would say that this is going to be very interesting if Bitcoin gets to an all-time high. It's really starting to gain some steam here. I'm currently seeing a quote at 73,560. What is our all-time high in Bitcoin? I think we're getting there right now. That could end up being one of the biggest stories of the night. It's really seeing a lot of momentum right now. And a lot of cryptocurrencies are moving higher as well. So one of the things I'll mention with the cryptocurrency stuff as well is because we were going through it earlier, but earlier was like 3 hours ago. And so the idea of volatility being front and center tonight is Bitcoin reach. You know what? I'm gonna tweet this. just gonna tweet this while we're doing this. Mm, why not? Um, so everybody expected that volatility was going to be a reality tonight in crypto. And everybody expected, well, I was saying everybody, the options market uh, was implying there'd be a more than normal move in the cryptocurrency. Um, it's been a big year of momentum for Bitcoin, obviously. It's up like 60%. Um, and it's probably one of the cleanest Trump trades, I guess, if you want to put it that way. Um, in the sense that, you know, look, you can make an argument that Kamala Harris has followed Donald Trump in being sort of friendlier on crypto related um, um, concepts, but we did see an industry crackdown under Joe Biden. And by comparison, I know Donald Trump was somewhat skeptical when he was in the White House um, on crypto, but like JD Vance, longtime Bitcoin investor, you've had support for Trump from um crypto enthusiasts like the Winklevoss twins. So I guess it's just a very uh, strongly identified Trump trade. And even when we'd see in the polls support for Trump leading up to the election, oftentimes like the crypto market would react to that as well. And so that's our breaking news, guys, is that Bitcoin has hit a record level as Trump has taken this early lead in the presidential race. And as for what happens to Bitcoin from here, I know a lot of you, have different views on cryptocurrencies. Completely indifferent on them, but like it's a big market story. Um, I'll tell you what some of the Wall Street people had been saying about Bitcoin. Um, eh, so there's a research team at Bernstein that's sort of laid out two scenarios. They felt like, if Trump is the crypto friendly president, that under a scenario where Trump wins the election, maybe 80, $90,000 is a reasonable target for crypto. We literally just saw it here, just with some signs that Trump is in the lead. We saw a record high, um, well north of 73,000. I think it's getting close to 74,000 actually. Um, And if Kamala Harris were to win, Bernstein sort of went completely in the other direction, suggesting that, maybe it tests 50,000. Um, by the way, if you just stumbled on this channel and you don't subscribe, please do. And if you're enjoying what you're seeing here, it'd be really important to me. It's been great to be with you guys for the last few hours. I could use your support as a subscriber. Um, but the thing is, it's some of these bulls on Bitcoin, like they have some pretty cemented views. Like even Bernstein, they have a year-end target for next year north of basically at around 200,000, uh, regardless of who wins. So they're pretty bullish. And then there was a call from Standard Chartered. That's another research firm. They had predicted that Bitcoin could get to um, 125,000 by the end of the year with a Trump win. Look, these are just targets. I do like to share some of the targets from people who are covering this day in day out because nobody knows the future, and some research firms are willing to stick their neck out and make a call. And I know a lot of people are interested in calls, so that is what some of the more bullish strategists have said about Bitcoin if Trump were to win. So I guess what I'm saying is As we are watching this election coverage, and we just saw Bitcoin hit an all-time high as traders are watching these U.S. election results, it probably shouldn't be a surprise because it wasn't that far off a record level, and some of the more bullish people have been suggesting that it could ultimately get up to an all-time high if Trump were to be the winner tonight. And yet, I will also mention that it still feels too early to, lean in that direction until we figure out at least what happens in some of those swing states. But I'm hoping that we'll get some more clarity on stories in North Carolina and Georgia soon. One other thing I will share with you, actually, I did a tweet on this today on X. I was curious to know what had happened. It's always funny, like I'm pretty dedicated to getting numbers right. Like, you know, that's that's what we're all about here is numbers. And I saw some numbers about Bitcoin's performance after past elections, which I can't remember who reported it. It was inaccurate in the end. Doesn't matter. Bitcoin is still a young asset, just over, what, 15 years. But in the 3 elections we've had, it has enjoyed success post-election. After 2012, when it was clearly at a much lower level, as you know, after the 2012 election, it was up more than 2,500% in the year that followed. After the 2016 election, it was up more than 900%. And then after the 2020 election, it rose another 350% in the next 12 months. These are just numbers. I'm not associating any why with any of that. But since a lot of people are talking about stock market performance in the year that follows an election, and the fact that it moves higher, I figured I'd show the Bitcoin story as well. So a new record high for Bitcoin, I believe now of more than 75,000. And again, that's tied to this view that Donald Trump is having a good night so far. One of the other things I am seeing right now is a projection from Bloomberg that Donald Trump has taken Iowa. So again, for this fairly straightforward storyline so far that we've watched play out tonight, stock market moving higher, Bitcoin moving higher, Tesla moving higher, and some worries, I guess, in global currencies tied to potential Trump tariffs. All of this steam around what appears to be an early lead for Donald Trump. Just watching on network television as they continue to dive deep into the situation in North Carolina. I know I've said it a few times. People drop in and out of this room, so I'll say it again to you. If Donald Trump takes Georgia and North Carolina, it does create a very high bar for Kamala Harris in the path to 270 electoral college votes. If my math is correct here, there would need to be a sweep in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which certainly is a possibility based on some of the early polling that we have seen, or an upset in Arizona. And something tells me Arizona could take some time. If we want to add Nevada into the fray of swing states that we're waiting on, that could take some time too. But I guess I'm sort of sitting here tap dancing on North Carolina and Georgia because in light of the fact that Trump is already off to a pretty strong night, you're probably going to see even more momentum if Georgia and North Carolina go his way. Now, there is a totally separate matter that, look, I don't know how this is all going to play out, but if we want to talk about the popular vote, um, and for now, this is a side story, but it is a story worth at least chewing on. Um, and if California takes a long time to count votes, and it could, I mean, it's just an enormous state. The popular vote story could take some time, but that's the point. It could take some time, and one has to ask the question of if there is sort of, because of the early lead story that Donald Trump is enjoying right now, um, if in the end, as I'm just taking a look at what's happening right now on the road to 270, um, if in the end you see numbers that are different down the road, is there, some kind of um, um, battle on ultimately who is victorious? Anyway, we'll get into that later. I don't really want to get into that right now. Um, but but I do think that um, the way things are going to play out from here are, if okay, hey Bonnie, thanks for joining. Thanks very much for being with us. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Um, yeah, it seems like right now, and I'm even just looking, it looks like CNN is still putting Trump ahead in Georgia, putting Kamala Harris ahead in Michigan, um, putting Trump ahead in North Carolina. You could still have this situation here where I suppose, where if Trump takes Georgia and North Carolina, but Kamala Harris takes Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, that we're into that third scenario, the toss-up scenario. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying is, there's really three scenarios. There's, Harris wins cleanly, there's Trump wins cleanly, there's the toss-up. And I just feel like, looking at this polling data so far, it's hard to know. Thank you for the question about stock market correction. I think there are a lot of people that feel uneasy about the record highs for stocks. And I will tell you that there are some people that have voiced their concerns to me about the market, and they feel that way as well. And yet, I think that the reality is that markets do correct. And, uh, the pullbacks that we have seen so far during this bull market have been pretty swift. So it's been hard to break the bull, but they do happen. And a correction, what's a correction? Like, classically, like 10%, right? Wouldn't you say? Or you're thinking about something else? I mean, if the market goes down 10% after the run up that we've seen, does it derail the long-term story on stocks? Nobody knows the future. Nobody knows the future. Stock market's had a really good run. The stock market has a few things that could continue to benefit from. Clearly, there's a view tonight based on the early success for Donald Trump that maybe that's something worth being bullish on. We'll find out with time. Clearly, there's a view that if the U.S. economy can hold up and interest rates are coming down to a certain extent, that's something that could be favorable. We'll find out with time. Um, so, I think the wild cards in the market will. Um, it's almost like they feel like the unknowns. It doesn't feel to me like we're in that moment where some people talk about you know the point in a market cycle where nobody is worried about any kind of pullback. Um, 20, 30%. Yeah. So would we see that bear market? Um, Honestly, nobody knows. Nobody knows. You know, um, this market has been really strong. I was saying earlier that there was a strategist at a firm called Evercore, and because people were asking about different sectors and different stocks that might do well, depending on if Trump won, for example. And their view was that if Trump wins, the S&P could move towards 6,300 by the end of the year. So, I mean, does the markets always pull back? You know, do you move away from the market because it might pull back? You could. I mean, it looks like Warren Buffett's been like selling Apple stock and selling some Bank of America stock. He seems okay to be holding cash. I don't give financial advice, by the way, but it's been tricky because the pullbacks that we've seen so far have oftentimes been pretty swift in this. I'm just looking at a chart of the S&P 500 because you were asking the question about it. I was going to see if I could find what I know the strategy. Some people feel differently about the Wall Street strategists, but I wanted to see if I could find a current breakdown for. Bear with me for 1 second here. No, I haven't researched that. I'm sorry. I will come up dry on that. I apologize. Okay. I'm not quite getting to this. Okay, I can't find it. Sorry, I was trying to find the current breakdown of Wall Street calls on where the stock market go from here. Anyway, that's not a very definitive answer for you, but something to watch. Okay, well, I think that here's what we're going to do. We're going to stick around until 10:30 because that's 7 minutes. And it's been great to have a lot of people here, but it's hard to know when things are going to play out in North Carolina and Georgia, but you're getting a sense already on what's going on. And it's been great to have so many of you guys here so far. Truly, really has been good. It really has been good. And please do check out my YouTube channel as well. Let me give you another quick update here, though, while we wait. We'll see if... it was not. Yeah. I was just watching what they were saying on the network about projections tonight. The S&P futures contract still holding a pretty sizable move in the after-hour session here. It's up more than 1%. We had that record high for Bitcoin. That's emerged as one of the biggest storylines so far tonight. Elon Musk, who has been a diehard supporter of Donald Trump for these last few weeks. We had seen Tesla shares up earlier. They seem to have pulled back a little bit from their earlier gains, but we'll continue to watch that one. And there's also this story of the currencies around the world, um, the weakness in the Mexican peso, some weakness in the Japanese yen, in the euro, as investors are just trying to get their heads around the idea of a possible high tariff Trump administration and what that might ultimately mean. Um, one thing I didn't talk about was we did see a little bit of interest tonight in um, small cap stocks. The Russell 2000, for example, has been doing well. There's a general view that smaller companies that have domestic operations are seen as potential gainers if there's a Republican win. Um, so, that would be something else to watch. And we had seen some gains in Trump's own Trump media, um, just as the excitement around his possible victory was getting some early attention. Um, that company's valuation's been pretty incredible. I think I saw a stat today that suggested that it has been so strong as a stock performer that it was valued at more than or equal or more than Harley Davidson, even though it's not a really notable revenue builder so far. Couple of quick comments just as we wait to see if anything more materializes in states like Georgia and North Carolina. A comment from one of the strategists at JP Morgan Investment Management saying that the market seems to be pricing in more of a Trump sweep now. And their view is maybe the market is getting a bit ahead of itself. But generally, Trump is outperforming in the markets tonight. He's outperforming on the electoral map so far, and he's outperforming in the minds of the markets. This dollar strength that we are seeing on the back of Trump odds improving in the early vote, as I mentioned, it's hitting the Mexican peso and it's impacting the euro and it's impacting the yen. So, I think you've got that. And, we got that great question earlier about the stock market correction concerns. I'll read something from the strategy team at UBS Global Wealth Management that said, in their view, as they watch the election, they're still really bullish. They're still fairly bullish on the stock market through the end of next year, in part because they think that some of the themes we've already talked about, interest rates coming down, AI being strong, that those are the kinds of things that could help stocks regardless of who wins the U.S. election. So I think we'll have to see that. I think we'll have to see how that plays out. I do think that one thing that we haven't talked about so far tonight that it's a little more wonky, but right now, since the market is sort of building a case for a Trump presidency tonight, and it is still way too early to call that, but in that kind of scenario, if the global markets right now are reacting to the possibility of a Trump tariff presidency, one would have to wonder whether or not the U.S. Federal Reserve would also have to try to figure out what a Trump tariff presidency would mean. In other words, would there be some inflationary forces associated with a strong focus on tariffs? At least I'm just paraphrasing what some people in the markets have been talking about. Could it force the Fed to keep rates restricted for longer? That's something we may have to watch play out as well. So that's the current scenario. And as we approach 10:30 Eastern time, I am seeing a projection from Bloomberg that Donald Trump is going to win Georgia. So that's a definite story to be watching very closely. That is potentially one of the first swing states to be decided upon. And I think in that scenario, that's only going to add to the market momentum we have seen so far. Um, we're seeing a number of calls, um, decision desk going to making the call on Georgia for Trump. So that's definitely one of the headlines we're watching very closely here at 10:30 Eastern time, and I guess we'll see from here. So I guess to wrap up, it's it's a scenario right now where it's still early, and we're only getting started with swing states, but it would appear that um, the early success on the electoral map for Donald Trump has caught the attention of the markets, with stock futures higher and Bitcoin hitting an all-time high. And we will now watch very closely to see what happens in um, Georgia, which is now by decision desk being projected as a win for Trump, in North Carolina, which had been trending towards Trump based on some of the reporting, but we'll see what happens. Those two victories make it, if they occur, more difficult for Kamala Harris in her efforts to win swing states. But she, based on reporting from a number of television networks, has been faring fairly well in some of those northern battleground states. But there would likely need to be a sweep of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And at that point, I think you could sort of more clearly be talking about whether or not we've got a toss-up scenario. Until we get a little later into the night, it feels like we're not going to be able to know. I'm going to sign off from our YouTube feed here. It's been really great to hear from all of you guys. Thank you very much for tuning in for our first YouTube live stream. And I'd love to hear more from you going forward. Stay in touch with me, send me a note, and we'll do more of this. We're going to do a lot more lives going forward, and we're going to start bringing on some great guests as well. So this was a good test run for me. Enjoy the rest of your election night coverage, and thanks for being with me here. It's been really great. All right, we'll talk to you soon.